It was 10:45 p.m. when I clocked in for another night shift at the nursing home. I had been working there for almost 2 years, long enough to grow used to the quiet, the steady hum of machines, and the occasional late-night moans from the residents who talked in their sleep. The place was small, only about 20 patients and 2 night staff on duty. That night, however, I was alone. My coworker had called in sick, and the supervisor told me to just get through the night. I didn't think much of it at first. I had done solo shifts before, but that night would be different. The nursing home sat at the edge of town, surrounded by trees that blocked most of the streetlights. It was peaceful during the day, but at night, it always felt too still, too far removed from everything. I started my rounds like usual, checking each room to make sure the residents were settled in, their vitals steady, their doors slightly open in case they needed help. Everything was calm. Around midnight, I was in the east hallway when I heard something faint, like footsteps above me. The nursing home was only one story, so that didn't make sense. I paused, holding my flashlight steady. The sound stopped. I brushed it off as the old ventilation system groaning and continued on. But minutes later, I heard it again, this time behind me. When I turned, the hall was empty, the dim overhead lights flickering slightly. By 12:30 a.m., I was sitting at the nurse's station, writing down notes. I had the radio playing softly for background noise, and outside, the wind was rattling the branches against the windows. Then the intercom crackled to life. At first, I thought maybe one of the residents had accidentally pressed the call button, but the voice that came through wasn't any of theirs. It was a low whisper, distorted and almost broken. "You shouldn't be here." My pen slipped from my hand. I froze, staring at the speaker. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. No answer. Just static. I picked up the main receiver to trace the call, but none of the rooms were showing active call lights. Every line was clear. The residents were all asleep. I turned off the radio, suddenly very aware of how quiet the building had become. At 1 a.m., the lights in the west hallway began flickering. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check it out. The air felt heavier as I walked down the corridor, a strange chill creeping up my spine. I passed by Mrs. Turner's room. She was a light sleeper, usually humming to herself, but that night she was silent. I peeked in. She was awake, eyes wide open, staring at the corner of her room. "Mrs. Turner?" I whispered. She didn't respond. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. I stepped closer and realized she was mouthing something over and over. I leaned in, heart racing. "They're in the hall," she whispered finally. "They've been walking all night." I turned sharply toward the door, scanning the hallway. Nothing. Just the same flickering lights and the hum of the oxygen machine. "It's okay," I said softly, trying to reassure her. "No one's here." She didn't blink. Her eyes stayed fixed on the doorway. I left her room, feeling the temperature drop even more. My breath came out in faint clouds now. The hallway ahead seemed darker than it should have been, even with the lights flickering. As I walked toward the end of the hall, I caught a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision, a shadow slipping into one of the empty rooms. I spun around, shining my flashlight down the corridor, but it was empty. At 2 a.m., the power went out. Total darkness. The only sound was the beeping of backup generators and the wind howling outside. I turned on my flashlight, its weak beam slicing through the dark. The silence was oppressive. I tried calling maintenance, but my phone had no signal. I felt alone in a way I never had before. I went room to room, making sure the residents were okay. Most were asleep, though some had woken up, confused about the outage. I told them everything was fine, that it was just temporary, even though I didn't believe it myself. When I got back to the nurse's station, the intercom clicked on again. "You shouldn't be here," the voice said, clearer this time, deeper. I slammed the switch off, heart racing. Then I saw it on the CCTV monitor, a tall, dark figure standing in the middle of the east hallway, completely still. I stared at the screen, frozen. The figure didn't move. It had no distinct features, just a silhouette, blacker than the surrounding shadows. I grabbed my flashlight and turned toward the hallway, but when I got there, it was empty. The lights flickered back on suddenly, and everything looked normal again. By 3:30 a.m., I was shaking. I stayed near the front of the building, unwilling to go back down the halls alone. Then I heard something. Whispering. Dozens of overlapping voices coming from down the corridor. I followed the sound, flashlight trembling in my hand. The whispers grew louder as I approached the last room on the right, room 18, which had been unoccupied for months. The door was slightly open. I pushed it gently, the hinges creaking. The room was dark, except for the faint light spilling in from the hallway. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the far corner, facing the wall. It was tall, motionless. I took a step back, my throat dry. "Who's there?" I managed to stammer. The figure turned slowly, impossibly slow, until it was facing me. It had no face, just a void where eyes and a mouth should have been. My flashlight flickered and went out completely. I ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted down the hall, my shoes slapping against the tile, the whispers chasing me. I reached the nurse's station and hit the emergency alarm, but nothing happened. The system was dead. I hid in the supply closet, locking the door and sitting in the dark. The whispers were right outside the door now, soft, almost conversational. "You shouldn't be here," they said again, voices overlapping like a chorus of the dead. Then silence. At 5 a.m., I heard the front door unlock, the day staff arriving. I stumbled out of the closet, pale, shaking. They asked what happened, why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I couldn't even speak. When I showed them the CCTV footage, the tapes were blank. Every feed from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. had been erased. I quit the next day. Weeks later, I found out that before I started working there, another nurse had disappeared during a night shift. They found her car still parked out front, her phone and wallet inside the building, but she was gone. No trace. To this day, I can't drive past that nursing home without getting chills. I swear sometimes if I glance at the windows late at night, I see something tall and dark watching from inside. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I hear that same whisper, soft and distant, "You shouldn't be here." Story the end. It was one of those nights where the air in the hospital felt thicker, almost heavy, like it had absorbed all the anxiety and despair from the day before. I had just started my night shift at Mercy General, a mid-sized hospital in Ohio that had been around long enough to have its share of stories. I was a relatively new nurse at the time, still learning the rhythms of night shifts, the slow creep of time, the eerie quiet, the way shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally under the harsh fluorescent lights. But nothing in my training prepared me for what I would experience that night. I came in around 11 p.m., the usual coffee in hand, and was greeted by the nurse at the desk, a grizzled woman named Gloria who had seen every type of trauma and tragedy imaginable. She had that permanent squint that made her look like she was scrutinizing everyone for some unseen flaw. "Long night ahead," she muttered. "You've got the psych ward tonight. You know how it gets." I nodded, still half asleep, and headed to the psych ward. The air there had its own distinct smell. Clean but faintly antiseptic, mixed with the ever-present tang of fear and desperation. The first few hours were uneventful, checking patients, administering medication, and filling out charts. Most of the patients were quiet, lost in their own worlds, some mumbling, some staring blankly at the walls. It was around 1:30 a.m. when things started to feel off. I was walking down the main corridor when I noticed that one of the patient rooms had its door slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it open. It was Mr. Caldwell, an older man admitted for severe depression and paranoia. I knocked lightly. "Mr. Caldwell? Everything okay?" No answer. I pushed the door open and the room was empty. His bed was neatly made, the lights off, and his belongings untouched. A chill ran down my spine. I checked the nurse's station log. He hadn't left the ward. The cameras hadn't recorded him leaving. I called for security, but the cameras in the hallway didn't show him either. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. Gloria gave me a sideways glance when I reported it. "He's just wandering," she said almost dismissively. "It happens sometimes. Just keep an eye out." I nodded, but unease settled in my chest. I walked the hallways again, shining my flashlight in every corner, every darkened room, but there was no sign of him. It wasn't until I passed the maintenance closet that I heard it, a low, dragging shuffle, like someone scraping their feet across linoleum. I froze, heart pounding. The sound stopped as suddenly as it started. Thinking it was a staff member, I called out, "Hello? Security?" No answer. The corridor ahead seemed impossibly long, the fluorescent lights flickering sporadically. I started walking toward the sound, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but my curiosity pushed me forward. Then I saw him. Mr. Caldwell was standing at the end of the hallway, but something was wrong. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and his eyes were completely black, like pits. He didn't move, didn't respond to my voice. I tried to step closer, my stomach twisting, but as I did, the lights flickered violently, and when they stabilized, he was gone. Just gone. I ran back to the nurse's station, practically shaking. Gloria was sitting there, calmly sipping her coffee. "What happened?" she asked. I stammered. I saw him. His eyes. She sighed. "Night shift," she said again. "It gets to everyone eventually." By now, the hospital felt different. The quiet hum of the ventilators, the soft beep of monitors, it all seemed amplified, distorted, like I was underwater. I checked on other patients, but something felt wrong. The shadows under the doors seemed to move independently, stretching toward me, and every so often I could swear I saw a figure just at the edge of my vision, disappearing when I turned my head. Around 3 a.m., the intercom crackled. It was faint, barely audible, a whisper over the static. "Help me. Please." I froze. It wasn't the usual call tone for patients. I followed the sound down the hall to room 214, a long abandoned room that hadn't been used in years. The door was locked, but the intercom speaker seemed to come from within. I knocked and called out, but the voice didn't respond, except to whisper again, closer this time, "Help me." I ran to Gloria, panicked. "Room 214. There's someone in there. I heard them." She looked at me, expressionless. "No one's in there, sweetie. That room's been sealed for 5 years." Sealed. 5 years. I felt my knees go weak. "I swear I heard them. Please, we have to check." She didn't move. "You'll get used to it," she said, "or you'll leave. Either way, it doesn't matter. Just do your rounds and stay out of that room." I couldn't stay away. Some morbid pull made me walk back down the hallway, flashlight in hand. The intercom crackled again, and this time a figure appeared in my peripheral vision. A shadow, tall, leaning, impossibly thin. It darted across the hallway, faster than anything human. I spun around, but nothing was there. The rest of the night descended into a blur. Every few minutes, the intercom whispered, "Always from room 214, always calling my name." Every shadow in the hallway seemed alive, stretching, writhing. I checked every camera feed. Most of them were static, flickering, or just plain gone. On the few that worked, sometimes I caught glimpses of Mr. Caldwell standing silently in the hallways, watching me, eyes black as night. By 5 a.m., I was exhausted, barely able to hold my own fear at bay. I sat at the nurse's station trying to convince myself I was hallucinating. Gloria walked past, indifferent, and I noticed something that made my blood run cold. She wasn't entirely human either. Her shadow seemed wrong, stretching too far, curling under the desk in ways shadows shouldn't. Her eyes caught mine briefly, and they were dark, like Mr. Caldwell's. I tried to leave, but the doors were locked, the hallways twisting in ways that defied logic. Every time I tried to call for help, the intercom whispered, mocking me, "Don't leave. Stay." I spent what felt like hours trapped in that ward, hearing whispers, footsteps, laughter that didn't belong to anyone living. At one point, I hid in a supply closet, covering my ears, trying to block out the distorted voices, the sounds of dragging feet, the soft scratching at the door. I don't even remember what time it was when the first rays of sunlight crept through the small windows near the main entrance. But when I finally stumbled outside, the hospital was normal. No flickering lights, no static-filled cameras, no shadows twisting in impossible angles. I looked around, staff arriving for the day shift, patients being wheeled out for morning treatments. Everything was perfectly mundane. I tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed me. Mr. Caldwell had been admitted and discharged months ago, and room 214 had indeed been sealed for years. Gloria? She was listed as retired 5 years ago. I never worked a night shift again. I tried, once or twice, to tell friends what I saw, but every time the words caught in my throat. Because I know what I experienced was real, or at least real enough for me. Sometimes late at night, I still hear whispers faintly in the back of my mind. "Don't leave. Stay." And I wonder if some part of me never really left that ward, if I'm still wandering those endless twisting hallways, watched by eyes black as the void. Years later, I learned that Mercy General had been built over the site of an old asylum that burned down in the 1940s. Some records survived, showing a series of deaths under suspicious circumstances, patients disappearing, staff vanishing, fires breaking out with no cause. People whispered that the asylum had never really closed, that the hospital was just a new mask for the same horrors. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt: the dragging feet, the black eyes, the whispered warnings that I couldn't escape. And every time I pass by a hospital at night, I can't shake the feeling that those hallways are still there, twisting and stretching, waiting for the next night shift nurse to wander in. I still have nightmares, and sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up hearing that same dragging sound on the floor outside my bedroom door. I tell myself it's just the house settling, just the wind, deep down. But deep down, I know better. Some nights I think about going back, just once, to see if I can find Mr. Caldwell or Gloria or whatever it was that haunted that ward. But the thought terrifies me even more, because part of me knows that if I do, I might never come back. The truth is, night shifts aren't just hard on your body, they're hard on your mind. And when you're alone in a hospital after midnight with corridors that twist, shadows that move, and voices that call your name, you realize just how thin the line is between the living and something else, something that doesn't leave, that waits, patient for the next person alone enough, tired enough, and vulnerable enough to wander into its realm. I learned my lesson the hard way. Never take the night shift, never ignore the whispers, and never, ever enter room 214. Because some doors, once opened, are impossible to close. And some places, no matter how real they seem during the day, are alive with things that are beyond our understanding when the sun goes down. Even now, years later, I can feel it. The pull, the whisper of my name when the lights go out. And I know deep down that I never really left that hospital. That the night shift claimed me, like it claimed Mr. Caldwell, like it claimed Gloria, and countless others before us. You can run, you can scream, you can try to convince yourself it was all a dream, but some things don't let go. They wait, and they always, always come back. Story the end. It was 2:03 a.m. when the overhead fluorescent lights in the warehouse flickered once, then dimmed just enough to make me pause. I'd been working the night shift at the distribution center in northern Indiana for about 6 months by then, mostly unloading semi-trucks and scanning packages. It was monotonous work, but it paid a little extra for the overnight hours, and I liked the solitude. Fewer supervisors, fewer people to deal with, just the low hum of conveyor belts and the occasional radio chatter over the walkie-talkies. That night, though, something about the stillness felt heavier. It was winter, bitter cold outside, and the whole loading dock seemed to hold its breath between the constant gusts of wind that found their way through cracks in the big metal doors. I was the only one assigned to Dock 7 that night. My partner, Dale, had called in sick. Normally that wouldn't have bothered me. I liked working alone, but around midnight, the air had taken on a strange feeling. It started with a sound. I was standing at the end of the conveyor, scanning labels, when I heard a faint tapping from inside the back of the semi-trailer I was unloading. At first I thought maybe some boxes had shifted. It happens all the time. The vibrations from the road can cause the stacks to move a little. But this tapping was rhythmic. 3 taps. A pause. Then 2. Then 1. I stood still for a second, scanner in hand, the green laser blinking uselessly against a box of car parts. Hello? I called into the dark trailer. No response. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed up into the back. The air inside was stale, tinged with the smell of cardboard and cold metal. The tapping stopped as soon as I stepped in. I played the light around the walls, over the stacks of boxes. Everything looked normal. I walked slowly toward the front of the trailer, the beam of the flashlight bobbing with my steps. When I got to the last row, I froze. There was a small patch of condensation on the inside wall, like someone had been breathing against it. It was strange because it was well below freezing outside, and no one had been in there for hours. The truck had arrived at 10 p.m., sealed tight. I checked the back latch when it arrived. There was no way anyone could have been inside. Still, the fog on the wall had a distinct handprint in the middle of it. I backed out slowly, heart pounding, telling myself it had to be left over from the driver earlier that evening. Maybe he checked the load before he left. Maybe his breath had frozen and left the mark. That explanation calmed me for a bit. I went back to scanning, focusing on the repetition of the job. Pick up box, scan, place on belt, repeat. The rhythm kept my thoughts busy. About 30 minutes later, my walkie crackled. Dock 7, you good back there? It was Mark, the shift lead. Yeah, just finishing truck 1934. I said, copy that, just checking. Cameras glitched out for a second. I frowned. What do you mean? Your dock feed went black for about 10 seconds. Everything else was fine. Probably nothing, I said, forcing a laugh. Probably. Just weird. Anyway, carry on. The radio clicked off. I turned and looked up toward the corner camera mounted near the ceiling. Its red recording light blinked normally again, steady and slow. But for some reason, I couldn't shake the idea that something had moved in those 10 seconds I wasn't being watched. I went back to work, trying to ignore the feeling of being observed. The next truck was due in around 2:30 a.m. and I wanted to get ahead. When I stepped outside for a smoke break, the cold hit me hard. My breath came out in thick clouds as I lit my cigarette and leaned against the concrete wall. The lot was empty except for a few parked semis and the distant sound of the highway. That's when I noticed footprints. They led from the back of Dock 7's trailer door toward the chain link fence at the edge of the property. Bare footprints. No shoes. I crouched down. They were small, maybe a woman's or even a teenager's. The snow around them had started to freeze over, but they looked fresh, pressed deep enough to show individual toes. I followed them with my eyes to the fence line. There, near the bottom, the chain links had been slightly bent, like someone had crawled underneath. Every hair on my body stood on end. I crushed the cigarette under my boot and went back inside, locking the dock door behind me. I told myself it was probably just some local messing around. Kids sometimes tried to steal things from the trucks, or homeless people wandered through looking for warmth. I tried to rationalize it. But when I walked back into the loading area, something had changed. The overhead light above Dock 7 was flickering now, strobing just enough to cast everything in a pulsing half-darkness. The scanner on the belt had stopped working too. The screen read, "Connection error." I tapped it, reset it, nothing. Then, from inside the trailer again, came that sound. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it was faster, louder. I grabbed a crowbar from the tool rack and shined my flashlight into the back again. The beam cut through the darkness, and I swear, for a split second, I saw someone standing there at the far end. A woman, pale face, eyes wide open, hair hanging wet around her shoulders. She was barefoot. I blinked, and she was gone. The flashlight beam danced over empty boxes in the steel floor. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. I backed away, dropping the flashlight. It rolled across the dock, spinning the light wildly across the concrete. I radioed Mark. "Dock 7 to control. You there?" A burst of static. "Mark, come in." Finally, his voice crackled through. "Yeah, what's up?" "I think someone's in one of the trailers." "What? Which one?" 7. I swear I saw somebody." He sighed audibly. "Probably a transient. Stay put, I'm sending security over." A few minutes later, I heard footsteps echoing down the dock, boots on concrete. But when I looked toward the door, no one was there. "Mark?" I called. No answer. The footsteps continued, though, closer now, but from the opposite direction. Behind me. I spun around. The trailer door was open wider than before. A cold wind blew through it, carrying a faint, wet smell. I ran toward the main exit, my breath ragged, fumbling with the lock. I nearly tripped over my dropped flashlight on the way. That's when the intercom crackled to life above me. A woman's voice, whispering. Not Mark, not anyone I'd ever heard before. She said, "You left me here." The sound echoed through the dock, metallic and warped by the speakers. I froze, staring up at the intercom grill. "Who is this?" I shouted. No response, just static. Then the walkie on my belt hissed again. This time faint breathing came through. Slow, deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. "Mark?" I said again. A whisper answered, "Don't open the door." "What?" Static. Then silence. My entire body was shaking. I looked around the dock. Empty, except for the rolling conveyor and the shadows cast by the stuttering lights. I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled open the main exit door and stepped outside into the cold. The snow had stopped, but the footprints from earlier were gone. Completely gone. When I turned to look back at the dock door I just closed behind me, I froze. On the frosted glass window was a handprint. Small, wet, and unmistakably human. I backed away slowly toward the employee lot where I could see the distant glow of the security office. That's when I saw Mark walking toward me, flashlight in hand. "Hey, you good?" he called. I ran to him, barely able to speak. "There's someone inside, I swear to God." He frowned. "Security just did a full sweep. Nobody's in there." "That's impossible. I saw her." "Who?" I told him what I'd seen. The woman, the voice, the footprints. He just shook his head. "You've been here too long, man. Night shift does that to people." I wanted to argue, but when we went back together to check, everything was normal. The trailer was empty. No condensation, no handprint. The scanner worked again. Even the flickering light had stabilized. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. "Go home early. I'll cover your last hour." I didn't argue. I clocked out and drove home in silence. The image of that pale face burned into my brain. For the next few days, I didn't talk about it. I convinced myself I was exhausted, hallucinating maybe, but the more I tried to forget, the more little things started to happen. The night after that, I woke up at 3:07 a.m. to the sound of tapping at my bedroom window. 3 taps. Pause. 2. Then 1. I froze under the covers, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I told myself it was just a branch. Wind. Something explainable. But the next morning I checked. There were fingerprints on the glass. Small ones, just like before. A week later, I went back to work. I didn't tell anyone what had happened, but something was different in the warehouse. Dock 7 was roped off, a big yellow safety barrier across the entrance. I asked one of the day shift guys what was going on. He said, "You didn't hear? Last week, after you left, they found a body." My stomach dropped. What? Yeah, some woman, frozen to death behind one of the pallets, must have climbed in the truck before it got here. Probably homeless or something. Creepy as hell, man. I walked away without another word. That night, I quit. But even now, years later, I still hear that tapping sometimes, in hotel rooms, in my apartment, even when I'm driving at night, always the same rhythm. 3, 2, 1, like she's reminding me that I left her there. Story the end. It was December 2018 when I started working the night shift at a long-term care facility called Pine Creek Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, located about 15 miles outside of Lexington, Kentucky. I was 27 at the time, broke and desperate for something steady that didn't involve heavy lifting. The place wasn't exactly glamorous. It sat back off the main road behind a row of dying pines and a cracked parking lot with a single flickering lamppost that buzzed all night like an insect caught in a jar. I didn't know it then, but that building would end up changing how I saw everything: life, death, and whatever sits in between. I was hired as an overnight security and maintenance aide, which basically meant I walked the halls, made sure no one wandered outside, checked the doors, and occasionally unclogged toilets. The pay was terrible, the hours were worse, but I figured how bad could a nursing home be at night? Old folks sleeping, nurses charting, maybe the occasional call light. Easy money. My first week went fine. The other night shift staff, there were usually only 3 of us, kept to ourselves. There was Sharon, a nurse who'd been there for years, quiet but nice enough, and Luis, a CNA who never stopped talking about his side hustle flipping cars. The building had 2 wings, the West Wing for high care patients who needed constant monitoring, and the East Wing for long-term residents who were more independent. I mostly stayed in the West Wing since it had more security rounds. Everything started to feel off around the end of my second week. One night, around 3:30 a.m., I was doing my usual round when I noticed that the lights in the hall near room 112 were flickering. I didn't think much of it at first. It was an old building, and the electrical system was always acting up. But then I realized it wasn't just the ceiling lights. The emergency exit sign was flickering too, like someone was messing with the wiring. I wrote it down on my maintenance sheet and went to check the panel room, but everything looked fine. No trip breakers, no voltage issues. When I went back out, the lights were steady again. That's when I noticed something strange. The hallway smelled like cheap floral perfume, strong, almost chokingly sweet. None of the nurses wore perfume on shift because of resident allergies, and there wasn't a single air freshener near that hall. Later that night, I asked Sharon if she noticed anything weird near room 112. She just gave me a long look before saying, "You're better off not asking too many questions, honey. It's an old building." Then she went back to her paperwork. That answer stuck in my head for days. A few nights later, something else happened. I was finishing a round and checking the door to the courtyard. It had been snowing all night, and the lot outside was empty. No fresh tracks since the evening shift left. As I shined my flashlight at the glass, I saw what looked like faint smudges on the inside. Handprints, small ones, like a child's. The strange thing was, the facility didn't have any children. The youngest resident there was in their 50s. When I mentioned it to Luis later, he frowned and said, "You mean by 112? Nah, I don't go down there after midnight. That's the dead zone, man." "The dead zone?" I asked. He shrugged. "You'll see. Just, if you ever hear humming, walk the other way." He wouldn't explain further, no matter how much I asked. I brushed it off as employee superstition. Every old place like that has ghost stories. But a few nights later, I started hearing it myself. It was around 2 a.m. I was sitting at the small security desk near the nurse's station, scrolling through my phone, when I heard faint humming. It was soft at first, almost melodic, like someone trying to soothe a child to sleep. It came from the West Wing hallway, near 112 again. At first, I thought maybe one of the residents was awake, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the hall. The sound got clearer the closer I got. It was definitely humming, an old lullaby, though I couldn't place which one. When I turned the corner toward room 1112, the sound stopped instantly. The air was ice cold, and the smell of that same floral perfume hit me again, thick and cloying. I peeked into 112. The bed was empty. That room hadn't been occupied since I started working there. I checked the clipboard by the door. Last patient listed was someone named Margaret Hill, discharged, or maybe not discharged. The note was smudged, but I could make out the word expired. When I turned back to the hall, my flashlight flickered for a second, then steadied. I could have sworn I saw someone, a shape, maybe a woman, in the reflection of the door window at the end of the corridor. But when I shined the light there, nothing. I finished my rounds early that night and spent the rest of my shift sitting by the nurse's station with every light on. By the end of that month, I'd started to notice a pattern. The humming always came from that same wing, always between 2 and 4 a.m., and always with that smell of perfume. Sometimes I'd find little things out of place, doors open that I'd just locked, papers moved, a patient's light on when their room was empty. Once, the old record player in the common area started spinning on its own, though the cord was unplugged. I was starting to lose sleep. One Friday, Sharon called out sick, and it was just me and Luis working the night. Around midnight, we were sitting in the break room when the overhead intercom beeped. Normally, that only happened when someone called from a resident's room, but instead of a voice, we heard static, followed by that same faint humming. Luis looked at me, pale. "Bro, that's her." "Who?" He didn't answer. He just stood up, said he was going to smoke, and didn't come back for half an hour. When he did, he looked shaken. After the shift, I decided to look up old records on the place. The facility used to be called St. Mary's Infirmary back in the 1970s. It had a rough history, understaffing, neglect cases, even a few wrongful death suits. One name stood out in the old reports: Margaret Hill. She'd been a nurse there in the early 80s who died during a night shift. Heart attack. They said she was found collapsed outside room 112, clutching a child's blanket from a patient who had died a few nights earlier. That's when I realized the perfume, the humming, it wasn't random. It was her. Things escalated after that. One night, around 3 a.m., I was in the maintenance closet checking the fuse box when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around expecting Luis or Sharon, but no one was there. Then I saw something move past the glass window, just a blur of white. I stepped out into the hall, my flashlight trembling. The hallway was empty, but every door on that side had been opened. All of them. Then the humming started again, closer this time, maybe 10 feet away, though I couldn't see anyone. I started walking backward, flashlight shaking, whispering, "Who's there?" That's when I felt it. Cold air brushed the back of my neck like someone standing right behind me. My entire body froze. I slowly turned around, and in the faint glow of the exit sign, I saw her. A woman, wearing an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, pale as the walls, her hair pinned neatly, her face hollow. She wasn't solid, but she wasn't invisible either. More like light and shadow mixed. Her lips moved, and I swear I could hear a faint whisper, "Check the window." Then she was gone. I bolted out of that wing and didn't go back for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told Sharon what happened. She sighed and said, "You've seen her then." "We call her Miss Maggie. She used to work here long before it became Pine Creek. You're not the first to see her. You just have to ignore her. If you acknowledge her, it gets worse." I didn't want to believe that, but deep down, I knew she was right. For a while, things quieted down. A week went by, then two, and nothing strange happened. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it all. But then came the night that broke me. It was a blizzard outside, and the main road had shut down, so no one was leaving until morning. Around 1 a.m., the power went out across the facility. Emergency lights kicked in, but half the hallways were pitch black. The generator was old and unstable, so I went to the basement to reset it. The basement at Pine Creek was something out of a nightmare. Narrow hallways, exposed pipes, flickering bulbs that barely lit the concrete floor. The air was damp and smelled like mildew. I had to walk about 50 yards down to reach the generator room. As I got closer, I started hearing something over the hum of the emergency lights. A faint tapping, rhythmic like fingernails on metal. When I opened the door to the generator room, the noise stopped. The generator switch was flipped off, which was odd because it should have auto-started. I pulled it back on, and the lights upstairs flickered to life. I sighed in relief, then I turned around. In the dim light, I saw writing on the far wall, letters scrawled in what looked like rust, though it dripped too fresh to be old. It spelled, "Look in room 112. I stumbled backward, my flashlight slipping from my hand. When I picked it up again, the writing was gone, just smooth, dusty wall. I ran back upstairs. When I reached the West Wing, I noticed room 112's door was wide open. The hallway was freezing again, like someone had opened a freezer door. My breath came out in white clouds. Something inside me said I had to look. I stepped in. The room was empty except for the bed and an old chair by the window. But the window itself was fogged over from the cold, and in the condensation there were words traced by a finger. "Help me." I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds before the overhead light started flickering wildly. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. Hard. I hit the handle. Locked. From the inside, the temperature dropped even more. The air was so cold my skin burned. Then came the sound of crying, a child's sobs, faint but real, coming from somewhere inside that small room. I spun around, trying to find the source. The closet door creaked open just an inch, enough for the darkness inside to seem deeper than the rest of the room. The crying grew louder. I hesitated only a second before I yanked the closet door open. It was empty, but from behind me came a whisper, soft, right at my ear. "You shouldn't have come." I screamed, slammed the closet door, and kicked at the main door until it burst open. I sprinted down the hall, not stopping until I reached the nurses' station. Sharon and Luis were there, staring at me. Sharon looked calm, almost sad. "She finally showed you," she said. "I told you not to listen to her." I couldn't speak. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I'd pass out. They made me sit down, gave me water, told me to take the rest of the night off. I did. But when I got home, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that writing on the window, those words, "Help me," burning behind my eyelids. Over the next few days, I tried to research more about Margaret Hill. I found an archived newspaper article that confirmed her death, but what I didn't know was that she hadn't died of a heart attack like the hospital claimed. The coroner's report, at least the part I could access online, listed her cause of death as asphyxiation undetermined. Rumors at the time suggested she'd been found with bruising around her neck. There was more. The patient she'd been caring for, the one whose blanket she'd been holding, was a 7-year-old boy named Thomas. He had been admitted for severe asthma and died after being left unattended during the night shift. Margaret had been blamed for the negligence. A few days later, she was found dead in the same hallway. The facility closed down for almost 20 years before reopening as Pine Creek. When I returned to work, I noticed room 112 had been sealed off. No patients were ever assigned there again. But the humming didn't stop. Even months later, you could hear it faintly on certain nights, traveling through the vents, soft and almost mournful. The perfume smell came and went, and sometimes doors would still open by themselves. My last night there was in early April. I had already decided to quit, but I agreed to cover one last shift because Sharon's mother had fallen ill. It was quiet most of the night until around 2:15 a.m. when the fire alarm went off. I ran toward the West Wing, thinking maybe one of the residents had tried to smoke or something, but when I got there, the alarm panel showed the alert coming from room 112. That didn't make sense. The room was sealed. Still, the door was open when I got there, and smoke, not thick but visible, was spilling out. I grabbed the extinguisher from the wall and stepped inside. The smoke wasn't from fire. It smelled like burnt paper. I found a pile of old photos smoldering in the corner, though I hadn't seen them before. When I stamped them out, I realized they were black and white pictures. Nurses, patients, all dated from the early 1980s. And in every single one of them, Margaret Hill was there, standing in the background, unsmiling, watching whoever was in the photo. On the back of one, written in shaky pen, were the words, "They lied." I didn't wait to find out what that meant. I left the extinguisher, turned, and walked out. As I did, I heard it one last time, the humming right behind me, followed by a whisper that said, "Thank you." The door closed softly behind me, and the alarm stopped on its own. I quit the next morning. A few weeks later, I got a call from Luis. He sounded shaken. "Man, you're not going to believe this," he said. "They finally remodeled the West Wing, they tore down that wall near 112, and guess what they found inside?" I didn't answer. "They found bones," he said quietly. "Small ones, like a kid's." I hung up. I never went back to Pine Creek. It's been years now, but I still dream about that hallway. Sometimes late at night, I swear I hear that same lullaby humming from somewhere in my apartment, faint and distant, like she's still looking for peace she never got. Story the end. It was the kind of night that clung to you, thick and unrelenting, the air damp and heavy with the smell of rain on asphalt. I had been working the night shift at the hospital for a little over 2 years, enough to know that nothing about the dark hours was routine, but not enough to expect what happened that night. I was a security guard, and my post was the old West Wing, a part of the hospital that had been decommissioned from patient use years ago, but still housed records, equipment, and the occasional wandering staff member looking for storage. Most nights were quiet, too quiet sometimes, but I had gotten used to the hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant beeping of monitors from active wards, and the occasional shuffle of a janitor or nurse. That night, the storm outside made the building feel alive in a way it normally didn't. Rain lashed against the windows with an almost violent rhythm, and thunder rumbled in the distance like it was warning me about something I wasn't ready for. I settled into my chair at the security desk, a small, cluttered area with multiple monitors showing grainy black and white footage from the building's cameras. I sipped my lukewarm coffee, trying to stay awake, and flicked through the screens. Most of the footage was the usual: empty hallways, dark storage rooms, the cafeteria with chairs stacked on tables. Nothing out of the ordinary. Around midnight, I noticed something. On one of the cameras, camera 7, which overlooked a long corridor leading to the old surgical wing, a figure was moving. At first, I thought it was a maintenance worker or a nurse who had wandered in, but the figure wasn't moving like a person. It was jerky, almost stilted, like a malfunctioning robot. It seemed to glide rather than walk, sliding across the floor in the dim light. I leaned closer to the monitor. The figure was tall, impossibly thin, and wore what looked like a hospital gown, but it was gray, filthy, hanging off its frame in unnatural angles. Its head was tilted slightly, as if it didn't have a neck. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The figure was still there. I checked the hall in person. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the corridor, my footsteps echoing loudly. The place smelled damp, like mold mixed with something metallic. The further I went, the colder it got, until my breath started forming faint clouds in the beam of my flashlight. I reached the end of the hall, empty. Nothing. I called into my radio, jokingly asking if anyone else was seeing things. No response. I told myself I was imagining it. The storm outside had me on edge. Back at the desk, the cameras flickered. I glanced up and froze. The figure was standing in the middle of the hallway closest to me now. How had it moved so fast? The feed was grainy, but I could see it more clearly. Its arms hung loosely, too long for its body, and it had no visible face, just a pale, blank expanse where a face should have been. I felt a shiver run down my spine. My radio crackled. A voice, low and distorted, whispered, "Leave, now." I jumped back, nearly knocking over my coffee. I grabbed the flashlight again and ran toward the corridor, intending to confront whoever was playing a sick joke. But when I got there, the hallway was empty again. My heart pounded, my hands shook, and the rain outside hammered harder against the windows, almost like it was in sync with my pulse. I returned to the security desk, trying to rationalize it. Stress, lack of sleep, maybe some kind of audio feedback on the radio. I told myself it was over. But as I sat down, the monitors flickered again. Not just camera 7 this time. Every single feed went dark for a split second. And when the images returned, every monitor showed the same thing. The figure standing directly in the middle of the hallway outside the security office. My stomach dropped. It shouldn't have been able to move that fast, not physically. I grabbed my radio to call the front desk, to tell them to send someone over, anyone, but the radio squawked with static, then a garbled whisper that sounded like my name. I froze. The whisper was soft but insistent, stretching the syllables like it knew me. "Jay, come here." My name isn't Jay, but the voice said it like it knew me. I backed away from the monitors, heart racing. I grabbed my flashlight and ran down the hall toward the main lobby, figuring maybe I could exit the building and get help. The storm outside was insane. Rain streamed down the glass doors in sheets, and the occasional flash of lightning lit up the lobby in stark white. I pushed the doors open, and for a moment I thought I was safe. Then I saw it. Standing just beyond the automatic doors in the downpour was the same figure, wet, dripping, impossibly tall, staring at me with that blank, featureless face. I froze, and then it moved, not like a person running, but like something sliding across the water-soaked ground. I stumbled backward, slipped on the wet floor, and scrambled to my feet, barely making it back inside. The automatic doors didn't close behind me. They stayed open, and I could see the figure outside, tilting its head, waiting. I ran back toward the security desk, needing the cameras, needing to know it wasn't just my imagination. When I got there, all the monitors were static, pure white noise, and on the floor, in the reflection of the emergency exit light, I saw footprints, wet footprints, leading from the hallway to the desk. And then the smell hit me, something metallic, coppery, thick, like blood. But there was nothing around me, nothing visible. I called the police, fumbling over my words, my voice shaking like a leaf in a storm. When they arrived, they found nothing. No figure, no footprints, no blood. The storm had cleared. I tried to explain, but they looked at me like I was crazy. The next night, I returned to the building with a colleague, just to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it. Camera 7 was empty. The hall silent, and the old surgical wing felt just as abandoned and dull as it always had. But when I turned to leave, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. The figure, gone from the monitors, was standing at the end of the hall. Only for a second, but enough. After that night, I requested a transfer. I didn't want to work nights anymore, and I certainly didn't want to work alone in the West Wing. My supervisor didn't question me, he just nodded. He'd seen things too, or at least he believed in them enough to let me go without argument. Even now, I still remember the way it moved, the slow, sliding motion, the blank, featureless face, the way the whispers seemed to seep into my mind. I tried to rationalize it, to chalk it up to fatigue and stress, but I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't human. Weeks later, I heard a rumor from a night nurse who had been working in the Old West Wing before I left. She told me stories of patients who had died during surgeries decades ago, whose spirits never left the building. They were angry, she said. Lost, confused, trapped. But one in particular, she whispered, had been different. Not angry, not lost. It just wanted attention. It wanted to be seen. I don't know if it was that spirit or something else entirely. All I know is that no rational explanation could account for what I saw. And I know that every time it rained, I could almost hear the whisper of my name in the wind, the sound curling through the darkness like it had been waiting for me all along. Months passed. I avoided hospitals, avoided night shifts, avoided even thinking about it. But then I started noticing little things. Shadows at the edge of my vision, brief movements in the dark corners of my apartment, whispers that sounded like my name when the wind blew just right. I told myself it was paranoia. Stress. sleep deprivation. But deep down, I knew better. One night, about a year after that stormy shift, I was driving home late. The roads were slick from rain. The headlights cut through the darkness in thin streams, and there in the median, standing perfectly still, was the figure. Pale, tall, faceless, watching me as I slowed down. I slammed on the brakes, skidding slightly on the wet asphalt, but it didn't move, just stared. And then, as I blinked, it was gone. No trace, no footprints in the wet road, nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it sliding toward me, that blank face, that whisper calling my name. I quit my job, moved across state lines, tried to bury myself in work and life, but it never left. I've read stories about shadows, about spirits trapped in places of death, about entities that feed off fear. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe it wasn't even human once. Maybe it still isn't. I'll never know for sure. But I do know this. If you ever find yourself alone at night in a place that used to hold life but now holds only echoes, keep your eyes open. Don't trust the shadows. Don't ignore the whispers. And whatever you do, don't look directly at the corners of the hall where the lights don't reach. Because sometimes what's there isn't waiting for you to leave. It's waiting for you to see it. I haven't worked night shifts since. I don't plan to. I don't even like going out after dark if I can avoid it. And when it rains, I double-check my doors and windows because I know that figure is out there somewhere, sliding, waiting, like watching. And if it finds me again, I don't know if I'll get away. Even now, sitting here in daylight, I can feel it at the edge of my mind, a whisper I can almost hear if I focus too hard. I don't know how it knew my name or why it followed me after all this time, but I do know that it never stops. It doesn't need to. It's patient. It doesn't need to hurry. And one day, if I'm not careful, it'll be waiting for me again, just like that stormy night in the old West Wing. The hospital still operates, still buzzes with life during the day, but at night the West Wing remains dark, empty, and listening. Sometimes employees hear footsteps where no one should be walking or doors closing softly on their own. Security cameras occasionally catch fleeting glimpses of a tall, thin figure moving unnaturally, always just out of clear sight. And though most dismiss these occurrences, some have quit their jobs without explanation. I was one of them. I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I know that in the dead hours of the night, some things are better left unseen, because when you do see them, they remember you. Story the end. It was a Wednesday night when I first realized that the night shift at the manufacturing plant was going to be more than just monotonous. I had worked night shifts before, in retail and warehouses, and I was used to the slow crawl of time when the world outside slept. But this factory was different. It was old, built sometime in the 1950s, and though it had been updated in sections, the main floor still had that industrial oppressive feel, the kind that made shadows feel like they were moving just outside your vision. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, and the hum of the machines was relentless, vibrating through your chest in a way that made the air feel heavier. I was hired to cover the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., mostly because they had been struggling with thefts from the warehouse and needed someone awake to monitor the security cameras. The plant manager, a stocky man named Greg, gave me a tour during the day before my first night. He seemed nervous, like he didn't want to leave me alone down there. He handed me a set of keys and a flashlight. "Look, just stick to the routine," he said. "Check the cameras, do a round every couple of hours, and don't wander off. The building's old, pipes, wiring, you name it. You might hear things. Ignore them." I laughed it off at the time. Old buildings always creak, right? By 11:15 p.m., I was already sitting in front of the bank of security monitors. There were 12 cameras, most covering the production floor, the warehouse, the loading docks, and a few dead zones where Greg said they couldn't install cameras due to structural issues. The feeds were grainy and black and white, and the occasional interference line made the images even creepier. The first hour was uneventful. I did my rounds, walked through the echoing aisles of machinery and pallets stacked high with boxes. Nothing out of the ordinary. But by 1 a.m., things started to feel off. I noticed a flicker on one of the cameras in the packaging section, a shadow that didn't match any of the boxes or machines. I leaned closer to the monitor. It disappeared. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, but my stomach had that sinking feeling you get when something isn't right. I finished my round and went back to the monitors. About 30 minutes later, I heard a thud from the production floor. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out, heart racing. Nothing, just the machines humming and the empty aisles. I called Greg on his cell, but he didn't answer. The next hour was worse. Every time I passed the same corner near the old packaging machine, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I would swing the flashlight around, and there was nothing. But every time I went back to the monitors, I would catch fleeting glimpses of a figure, a man, I think, but distorted, shadowy, like someone glitched in and out of reality. By 3 a.m., I was convinced I wasn't imagining things. The shadows were becoming bolder. On the camera feed, I saw the figure standing near a stack of boxes, just staring at the camera. I blinked, and it was gone. I turned on my flashlight, but the corner was empty. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to call anyone, knowing they would probably laugh and chalk it up to nerves. Around 4 a.m., I was doing my rounds again, trying to stay awake and calm. The air felt colder in the back warehouse area, and I could see my breath even though the heater was running. I heard whispers, faint, almost like a conversation behind me. I turned. No one there. I started walking faster. Then I heard it again, clear this time. It wasn't words I could understand, just a rasping, guttural sound like someone speaking underwater. I ran back to the office area, slamming the door behind me. The camera monitors showed nothing, nothing at all. But when I checked the timestamp on the camera in the loading dock, the shadow figure was standing just at the edge of the frame, looking right at me. My blood ran cold. I felt frozen to the spot. Then the cameras went out, just black static. No interference, nothing. Dead. My flashlight flickered. The door to the office creaked. Slow, deliberate, footsteps, pacing outside. I wanted to call 911, but my phone had no signal. I was trapped. I grabbed a heavy wrench from under my desk, telling myself it was just some intruder. Just an intruder, I muttered. But deep down, I knew it wasn't human. Humans don't disappear from security cameras. Humans don't make the temperature drop by 10 degrees in a few steps. Humans don't whisper in a voice that crawls under your skin. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. I held my breath, listening. Then I heard the slow dragging of metal across concrete, moving from one side of the room to the other. I don't know why, but I swung the door open, ready to hit whatever it was. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I backed into the office and slammed the door. By 5 a.m., I was on edge, exhausted, and borderline hallucinating. I told myself I needed to finish the shift. Just a couple more hours. But as I checked the cameras one last time, I saw something that made my stomach twist. On the camera covering the main production floor, all the machinery had stopped. Not powered down, but frozen, like someone had paused reality. And standing in the middle of the floor was the shadow figure, taller than a normal man, faceless, with limbs that seemed slightly wrong, too long, bent at angles they shouldn't be, and it was looking right at me. I swear. It smiled. I don't know how a shadow could smile, but it did. And then in a blink, it was gone. I finished my shift shaking, barely able to keep my hands on the wrench. I left the plant as soon as my relief showed up, refusing to look back. I told Greg nothing, just said the night went fine. He nodded, oddly relieved, like he had hoped I'd see something, but didn't. I quit after that night. I didn't even wait for the next paycheck, but I couldn't get it out of my head. Every night since, I see it in my dreams, standing in the corner of a dark, empty warehouse, staring at me. A few months later, I found an online forum for night shift workers in industrial facilities. I posted anonymously, describing the building and the night. Someone responded almost immediately, saying the same plant had been abandoned in the 80s after a series of mysterious disappearances. One night, the night watchman saw a shadow man pacing the floors before he disappeared without a trace. Employees had always whispered about it, but it was never documented publicly. The company bought the old plant, restarted operations, and apparently nothing had changed. The shadow figure had been waiting for someone awake, watching. I've never gone near another night shift since. I still get nightmares, the kind that feel like memories instead of dreams. And sometimes, in the corner of my room, when the lights are off and the house is silent, I swear I can see him. The shadow figure, taller than me, faceless, just standing there, waiting, watching. I told a friend about what I saw. He laughed. Shadow people, man, everyone sees them. It's stress, sleep deprivation. But he's never worked nights in a plant like that. He doesn't know the sound of machinery stopping mid-operation, the cold that hits your bones like ice water, or the whispering voice behind you that isn't human. I keep my wrench under the bed now. I don't sleep well, and sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint echo of footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment, slow and deliberate. I thought it had stayed in the factory, but I don't think so anymore. I think it follows night shift workers, watching them, waiting for their fear. It doesn't make sense. No one else sees it. The cameras never catch it. And yet, I know it's real. I've lived it. I've felt it breathing down my neck when there was no one there. And I will never, ever work another night shift again. Months passed, and I tried to put it out of my mind, took a day job, avoided factories. But one night, I got a call from a former coworker, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. He had taken a night shift at another old plant in a different state, and he sounded panicked. "I think it followed me," he whispered. "The same shadow I saw in your plant. Well, it's here. I can feel it. It's watching." I didn't know what to say. I hung up, but I couldn't sleep. And then I remembered the thing that made the factory night shift different, the absence of other people. It thrived in emptiness when the world sleeps. That night, I realized the shadow isn't confined to buildings. It doesn't stop at walls or locks. It follows, it waits. And every night, when darkness falls and the world outside my apartment goes quiet, I know it's there. Somewhere, watching, waiting. Sometimes I swear I can hear the faint sound of a wrench scraping the floor, moving slowly toward my bedroom door. I moved apartments 3 times. It still finds me. The shadows never stay gone for long. I know it's not going to leave. And I don't know what it wants. I only know one thing for sure. The night shift is a door. Once you open it, the darkness doesn't let go. And now, every time I hear a factory hum in the distance or the slow drip of water in a quiet hallway, I think of that night, of the shadow, and I realize the truth. Some things aren't afraid of you. You are afraid of them. I sometimes wonder if the old plant is still running, if the figure still waits for the next poor soul foolish enough to cover the night shift. I don't want to know. I will never go back. But I see it sometimes, in reflections that don't belong to me, in corners where no light reaches. And every time, I remember that terrible, suffocating weight of being watched by something that shouldn't exist. Something patient, something eternal, something that thrives in the emptiness of the night. And I know, deep down, that one day someone else will take that shift, and it will be waiting for them, just like it waited for me. Some nights, when I can't sleep, I reach for the wrench under my bed. I hold it close, feeling the cold steel in my hands. I tell myself it's enough. But the truth is, I don't know if anything is enough to stop it. I've never told anyone the whole story. People don't believe it. They call it stress, exhaustion, paranoia. But I know the truth. I've felt its presence. I've seen it move in ways that defy logic. I've heard it whisper my name in a voice that isn't a voice. And the worst part? The shadow doesn't even need to show itself. It just needs you to be awake. That's enough, because once you're awake, it's already there, waiting, watching, and maybe one day it will come for you too. Story the end. It was past midnight when the first unusual thing happened at the Pineview manufacturing plant. The factory had always had a certain eeriness during the night shift, but usually it was just the machinery clanking, the echo of footsteps in the empty hallways, or the hum of fluorescent lights. That night, however, something felt off. Jamie, a 28-year-old night shift supervisor, noticed it immediately when he walked into the main floor. The air was unusually cold for late October, and there was a faint smell of something burning, but the machines weren't on, and nothing seemed to be smoldering. He shrugged it off as fatigue. Night shifts had a way of playing tricks on your mind, making the familiar seem alien. He unlocked the office, checked the logs, and made his rounds. By 1:30 a.m., most of the workers had gone on their break, and Jamie was alone, walking through the dimly lit aisles between the towering shelves of raw materials. That's when he heard it, a soft tapping sound, like someone tapping their fingernails on metal. He froze. "Hello?" he called, his voice echoing oddly in the vast space. No response. Just the faint hum of the lights overhead and the occasional drip of water from a leaking pipe somewhere in the distance. He assumed it was one of the maintenance guys playing a prank. By 2:15 a.m., things escalated. Jamie was in the storage room checking inventory when he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned sharply, but no one was there. The room was empty, but stacked high with crates, creating shadows that seemed to move on their own. Then he heard it again. The tapping, faster now, almost like someone was rapping on the crates. He walked closer, heart pounding, and found nothing. He decided to call the night crew on his radio to check if anyone else was there, but the device crackled with static. No response. Odd, he thought. Everyone had logged in for the night. Maybe it was a dead battery? He pocketed the radio and continued his rounds, trying to convince himself he was imagining things. At 3 a.m., Jamie was in the break room, pouring himself a cup of lukewarm coffee, when he noticed the security monitors flicker. The screens that usually showed the entire factory floor in neat squares were now warped, showing only shadows and static. In one of the monitors, he thought he saw a figure standing near the conveyor belt, just for a moment. He rubbed his eyes. The figure was gone. He picked up the phone to call security, but the line was dead. The lights in the break room flickered, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Jamie's breath fogged in front of him. He could hear whispers now, low, unintelligible murmurs coming from the ventilation ducts. Goosebumps spread over his arms. He tried to rationalize it. Air currents, the old building settling stress. But deep down, he knew it wasn't normal. By 4 a.m., the weird occurrences had become impossible to ignore. The lights in the main hall began to dim and brighten in a staccato rhythm, like a heartbeat. Jamie tried to leave the hall, but found that the doors he had unlocked earlier were now jammed, as if something or someone was holding them shut. Panic began to set in. He banged on the doors, screamed for help, but no sound reached the outside world. The tapping sound had returned, echoing through the hall, faster, louder, and now accompanied dragging noises. Jamie ran to the maintenance room, hoping to find some tools to pry open a door. That's when he saw the figure. At first, he thought it was a coworker, but as he focused, he realized it wasn't human. It was tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed elongated, bending at unnatural angles. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its head was tilted in a way that defied anatomy. It moved in short, jerky bursts, crawling along the ceiling and walls as if gravity were optional. Jamie froze, unable to breathe. The figure stopped moving, staring at him with black voids for eyes. Then it made a sound, not a voice, not a growl, but a sort of vibrating hiss that seemed to penetrate his skull. Jamie stumbled back, tripping over a toolbox. When he looked up, the figure had vanished, but the tapping continued, moving closer, circling him. He grabbed a flashlight and ran, following the corridors as best he could. The factory, which he knew like the back of his hand, seemed to stretch and twist, hallways leading to places that shouldn't exist. Doors opened into walls. Stairs descended into rooms that weren't in the building's blueprints. It was like the space itself was alive, rearranging around him. At 5 a.m., Jamie finally reached the main control room. He slammed the door shut behind him and barricaded it with whatever he could find. The monitors were all dead, replaced by static. The whispers were louder now, surrounding him, coming from all directions. Jamie pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering as he felt a cold presence move past him. Something brushed against his shoulder, and he jumped, swinging the flashlight wildly. Nothing was there. Then he heard it, a voice. Soft, almost tender, but not human. It whispered his name. Jamie, Jamie. He froze, eyes wide. The voice continued, repeating his name over and over, each time a little louder, a little closer. The air in the room felt thick, almost liquid, pressing down on him. He could barely move. At 5:45 a.m., the emergency exit lights flickered on. Jamie sprinted toward the door, praying it would open. As he reached for the handle, the dragging sound slammed against it from the other side, as if whatever had been stalking him was trying to come in. He yanked the door open and ran into the parking lot. Outside, the early morning fog clung to the ground. The building behind him looked normal in the daylight, ordinary even. He ran to his car, jumped in, and drove away without looking back. When he reached home, trembling and soaked in sweat, he called the police. They arrived within minutes, taking his statement and inspecting the building, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone or anything had been inside that night. The security cameras had gone offline for a brief period, but everything else was perfectly normal. Jamie took a few days off work, hoping it was a one-time hallucination brought on by stress. But when he returned, the odd occurrences began again, subtly at first. Objects moved slightly, shadows appeared in his peripheral vision, whispers in empty rooms. One night, a coworker mentioned hearing his name called in the middle of the night, even though he had been alone on the floor. Over the following months, more workers reported strange experiences. Machines turning on by themselves, unexplained cold spots, shadows moving without source, and soft, unidentifiable noises echoing through the plant. Some quit, others refused to work the night shift. The plant management chalked it up to superstition and the stress of graveyard hours. But Jamie knew better. He had seen it, the figure with impossibly long limbs, the shifting hallways, the whispers calling his name. One evening, during a particularly late shift, Jamie stayed behind after everyone had left. He had to check some inventory in the far end of the warehouse. As he walked through the rows of shelves, he heard the tapping again. Louder this time. It came from above. He looked up and froze. The figure was perched on a metal beam, looking down at him with those black void eyes. Jamie tried to run, but the floor beneath him seemed to ripple, slowing his steps, warping the world around him. He stumbled and fell, hitting his head against a crate. When he opened his eyes, the figure was gone, but the whispers had intensified, now sounding like a chorus of voices, all chanting his name. Jamie scrambled to his feet and ran toward the exit. The doors that had always been reliable refused to open, as if the building itself was holding him in. Minutes, or maybe hours, later, the doors finally gave way. Jamie ran out into the night, gasping for air. He didn't stop until he reached his car, parked several blocks away. That night, he made a decision. He would never return to Pineview Manufacturing on the night shift. Not ever. Weeks later, Jamie heard that a night shift worker had gone missing. No one knew what had happened. The company conducted an investigation but found nothing unusual. Rumors circulated among the workers about the thing that haunted the night shift, but most dismissed them as exaggerated tales. Jamie knew the truth. He had seen it. He had felt it. And he knew that whatever it wasn't confined to one person. It could take anyone. The experiences didn't stop at Pineview. Over time, Jamie realized that the thing, whatever it was, followed him. Shadows would flicker in his peripheral vision, whispers would echo through his apartment at night, and doors would creak open on their own. The tapping, always the tapping. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night to the feeling of long, cold fingers brushing against his arms. He began to avoid going out at night entirely. Lights were left on constantly, doors bolted, and yet the feeling persisted. He was being watched, followed, hunted. Friends and family noticed the change in him, the constant edge in his voice, the jittery movements. They suggested therapy, medication, even moving to a new city. But Jamie knew deep down that it wasn't something that could be escaped. He tried to research the factory, the land it was built on, the previous owners. He found old news articles about unexplained disappearances, accidents, and fires, but nothing that could explain what he had encountered. People had gone missing, sometimes employees, sometimes trespassers, but all accounts were fragmentary and contradictory. Still, a pattern emerged. All incidents occurred during the night shift. All reported feelings of being watched, of things moving in ways they shouldn't. Jamie started documenting his experiences meticulously, recording the times, the noises, the sensations. Every night, he would check and recheck the locks, even setting up cameras inside his apartment. At first, he found nothing. But then, on a particularly stormy night, he reviewed the footage from his living room. The camera had captured shadows moving against the walls, too quick and angular to be human. And there, in the corner of the frame, he saw it. The figure, the same as in the factory, standing perfectly still, watching him with those endless black eyes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. It hadn't followed him out of fear or curiosity. It had claimed him. Or maybe it was patient, waiting, watching, learning. The factory had been just the beginning, and no matter what he did, he couldn't escape it. The tapping, the whispers, the cold presence, they were now a permanent part of his life. Even in broad daylight, he began to notice subtle signs. Shadows shifting unnaturally, reflections in mirrors that didn't match reality, doors slightly ajar when they should have been closed. He became hyper-aware, jumping at the smallest sound. Sleep became impossible without nightmares of the long-limbed figure, crawling through impossible hallways, its voice echoing in his mind. Jamie knew that telling anyone would only result in disbelief or ridicule. Over time, he stopped confiding in people entirely. His isolation grew. The thing was patient, and he realized that the best he could do was survive, live in constant vigilance, never alone, never unprepared. Years passed. The factory still operated, though night shifts were increasingly understaffed as workers quit in fear. Jamie never returned. He moved cities, changed jobs, but the figure, the tapping, the whispers never truly left. He had accepted that he would live in a constant state of alert, forever shadowed by the unseen. Sometimes when he walked alone at night, he would hear it, the soft, deliberate tapping behind him. Sometimes a whisper would brush against his ear, calling his name, and sometimes when he least expected it, he would catch a glimpse of that impossible form in the darkness, watching, waiting, reminding him that the night was never truly empty. He had survived, barely, but he knew deep in his bones that the thing had claimed a part of him, and it would never stop. Story the end. It was one of those nights where the air itself felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I had just started a new job at a manufacturing plant on the outskirts of a small town in Michigan. The plant was enormous, stretching across acres of land with long, echoing hallways and cavernous rooms filled with machinery that hummed, whirred, and occasionally groaned in protest. I was hired for the night shift, which ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., mostly because I had experience with maintenance work, and they needed someone to handle any unexpected equipment failures. The first week was uneventful, which I was grateful for. I spent my nights checking machinery, walking the endless corridors, and occasionally monitoring security cameras from a small, dimly lit office at the plant's core. The place had a history, though I didn't know all the details. The older guys mentioned that it had been operational since the late 1940s, and that a few accidents had occurred over the decades. Nothing seemed to bother me until my second month on the job. That's when things started happening that I can't explain. It began subtly. I'd be walking between machines in one of the storage areas and feel like someone was watching me. At first, I thought it was just paranoia. Night shifts are long, and the silence can play tricks on your mind. But then I started hearing things. A footstep, always just behind me. A whisper, so soft I couldn't make out the words. I asked my coworkers if they ever experienced anything strange at night, and they'd laugh it off, saying it was just the building settling or my imagination running wild. I wanted to believe that. I really did. One night, around 2 a.m., I was doing a routine inspection of the machinery in the far corner of the plant. That area was particularly dim, with flickering fluorescent lights that made it hard to see anything clearly. I heard it again, the soft shuffle of footsteps behind me. I froze, my heart pounding. I turned slowly, expecting to see a coworker, but the corridor was empty. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was nothing, and kept walking. Then the sound came again, closer this time. I felt a chill run down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and swung it toward the source of the noise. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there. I called out, "Hello? Is someone back here?" My voice echoed, but no one answered. That's when I realized something. The footsteps weren't just random, they were mirroring mine. Every time I took a step, there was another step, perfectly timed, just behind me. I started walking faster, trying to shake the feeling, but the steps accelerated with me. Panic set in. I broke into a run, darting through the storage area and toward the main corridor. When I reached the security office, I slammed the door behind me and locked it. I leaned against it, breathing heavily, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone to call the night manager, but the line was dead. That's when I heard it again, right outside the door. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth. I bolted for the emergency exit, a heavy metal door at the end of the corridor. I threw it open and ran out into the empty parking lot. The cold night air hit me, and I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I sat there for a long time trying to process what had just happened. I called the night manager from my cell phone and told him everything. He laughed and said I must have been overtired, that nothing could be in the plant after hours. But I knew what I had felt. I knew what I had heard. I tried to put it behind me, but it only got worse. A few nights later, while doing a routine inspection in the main assembly line, I noticed something strange on one of the monitors. The security cameras showed a figure moving through the plant. It was hard to make out in the grainy footage, but it looked like a person, tall, wearing dark clothing. But the strange thing was, the footage was from the night before, and no one was supposed to be in the plant after hours, except for me. I watched as the figure moved through the hallways, stopping occasionally to look at something, or someone, I couldn't tell. Its movements were slow and deliberate, almost calculated. I rewound the footage, trying to make sense of it. That's when I noticed it. The figure was always just out of the camera's range, like it knew where the cameras were and was avoiding them. But it didn't just avoid them, it seemed to be following someone, shadowing their movements, almost as if it was hunting. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it must be some glitch in the system, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I stayed in the security office, eyes glued to the monitors, but the figure never appeared again, at least not until I left the office for my lunch break. I had a small break room near the plant entrance, and I went there to grab a sandwich. The place was empty, quiet. I sat down, trying to relax, when I heard it, the whisper. This time, it wasn't just behind me, it was right in my ear. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "You shouldn't be here," the voice said, low and rasping. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart was racing, and I felt like I might pass out. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone, but the battery was dead. That's when I noticed the shadows. They were moving across the walls, stretching and twisting, but there was no light source. They seemed to slither, like liquid darkness, forming shapes that I couldn't quite identify. The next few nights were a blur. I started noticing things out of the corner of my eye, figures standing in the hallways, staring at me. Doors that I was certain I had locked were wide open. Machines that should have been off were running, humming with a life of their own. One night, I even saw a figure standing on one of the overhead catwalks, watching me silently. I tried to get a better look, but when I turned on my flashlight, it was gone. Sleep became impossible. I started taking naps in the break room, but even then, I would wake up to the sound of whispers, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. They seemed to be calling my name, mocking me, taunting me. I stopped telling anyone at work. They wouldn't believe me, and I was afraid they might think I was losing my mind. One night, I was in the storage area doing an inventory check when I felt it again, the footsteps. I froze, heart hammering. I turned slowly, and there it was, a figure tall and dark standing at the end of the aisle. It didn't move, didn't blink. It just stood there, watching me. I could feel its presence, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure raised a hand slowly, pointing at me. A cold wind swept through the aisle, though the doors were closed. The lights flickered, and for a moment I could see it more clearly. It was human-shaped, but its features were wrong, distorted like it had been twisted. Its eyes were dark voids, and its mouth stretched into a grin that was impossibly wide. I screamed, and suddenly it was gone. The lights returned to normal, the cold air vanished, and everything was still. I ran to the security office and locked the door, trembling uncontrollably. I called my boss and told him I couldn't work there anymore. I said I couldn't explain it, but I couldn't stay another night. He didn't take me seriously, but I didn't care. I quit on the spot. I tried to move on, to put the experience behind me, but it followed me. I started seeing shadows in my apartment, hearing whispers when no one was there. Friends said I was paranoid, but I knew what I had experienced. Months later, I heard that another night shift worker at the plant had quit suddenly, claiming something was watching him. No one else wanted to talk about it. Years have passed, but I still get nightmares. I see the dark figure standing at the end of hallways, in my dreams and sometimes when I'm awake. I know it's still out there, waiting, watching. And I know that if I ever go back to that plant, it will find me again. I don't understand it, and I don't know why it chose me, but I can't escape the memory. It's burned into my mind. a nightmare that never ends. Sometimes, when I drive past the old plant late at night, I see lights flickering inside, though the place has been abandoned for years. I hear the hum of machines that no longer exist, and I swear I see a shadow moving behind the windows. I've told myself it's just my imagination, but deep down, I know it isn't. I know that thing is still there, waiting in the darkness, patient and hungry. I've learned not to speak about it too loudly. People don't like to hear stories like mine. They dismiss them as crazy, as delusions brought on by isolation and fatigue. But I'm not crazy. I experienced it. I lived it. And every night, I wonder if the next person walking those halls will see it too. Will they feel the weight of its gaze? Will they hear the whispers in the dark? I still wake up sometimes, drenched in sweat, hearing the faint echo of footsteps in the distance, moving with a rhythm that matches my own heartbeat. It's like it's always with me now, a part of my reality, impossible to shake. I've moved towns, changed jobs, tried to build a normal life, but it doesn't matter. The darkness follows, a silent predator waiting for its moment. And I know one day if I'm not careful, if I wander too close to the edge of that darkness, it will take me back to the plant. Back to those endless halls filled with hums, whispers, and shadows. I will see it again, the figure at the end of the corridor, and I will feel that impossible grin, those void black eyes, and that cold, overwhelming presence. Some people might read this and think it's a story, a horror tale written for entertainment, but it's not. Every detail is real. I can feel it now, even as I sit here, the faint echo of footsteps behind me, the whisper at the edge of my hearing. I don't know if it's tied to me forever or if it's waiting for the next unfortunate soul to wander into the night shift, but I know one thing. It's real. And it's patient. No amount of rational thinking, therapy, or distance can erase it. It's embedded in my mind, my soul, my very perception of reality. And sometimes when the night is quiet and the world's empty, I still hear those footsteps, perfectly timed behind me, as though they've been following me all along. Story the end. It was one of those nights where the city seemed to hold its breath, like the world itself was leaning against the glass of my window, watching me. I worked the graveyard shift at a small convenience store on the edge of town, the kind of place that stayed open 24 hours more out of stubbornness than necessity. Most nights were uneventful. A few drunks, a couple of kids buying candy at 2 a.m, and the occasional regular who needed a late-night pack of cigarettes. But that night, something felt off from the moment I turned the key in the lock. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Normally, even at midnight, there was a low hum of traffic, distant sirens, the odd shout or bark. That night, it was like the street had swallowed its own voice. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was a storm rolling in. The sky was overcast, thick clouds blotting out the moon. I flicked the fluorescent lights on and did my usual sweep of the store. Shelves straightened, floor mopped, register counted. Everything seemed normal. Around 1:30 a.m., a man walked in. He was tall, dressed in a long black coat, and his hat was pulled low, shadowing most of his face. He didn't make a sound as he moved to the corner of the store. I watched him, expecting the usual, "Hey, can I get a soda?" But he didn't move toward anything in particular. He just stood there, staring at the snack aisle like he was memorizing it. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, forcing cheer into my voice. He didn't answer. He just lifted his head slightly, and I saw his eyes. They weren't dark, exactly. They were pale, almost gray, and the way he looked at me made my stomach tighten. Not fear at first, just a deep, instinctive unease, like my body was recognizing something it shouldn't. "Sir," I said again. He tilted his head slowly, almost mocking me, and finally spoke in a voice that was too low to be natural. "I'm waiting," I blinked. "Waiting. For what?" He didn't answer. He didn't move. And then the lights flickered. Just once. And the temperature in the store dropped. I could see my own breath. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was just the old wiring in the building and maybe a storm outside. I went back to the counter and kept an eye on him. Minutes stretched into something heavier. He never left the aisle. Never even blinked. Then, at exactly 2:07 a.m., the door opened behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The bell hadn't even rung. My heart started to hammer. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe I'd been staring at that man too long. But then I heard it. The softest shuffle, like footsteps dragging across the linoleum, slow, deliberate. I turned back toward the aisle, and he was gone. My stomach dropped. I ran to the aisle, calling out, but there was no one there. Nothing. I told myself to calm down, to think logically. Maybe he left without me noticing. Maybe I had imagined him. But the unease didn't leave. The store felt wrong, like it was holding its breath again. And then I heard a whisper. It came from the back of the store, near the storage room. "Don't leave." I froze. My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Don't leave." The lights flickered again, and I swore the shadowy corner of the store shifted slightly, as if someone or something had moved. My first instinct was to call the police, but my cell phone had no signal. Every logical thought I tried to hold on to evaporated, replaced with raw panic. I took a step toward the back, and the door to the storage room creaked open by itself. I saw a figure step into the dim light. Not the man in black this time, but someone or something, tall, with an impossibly thin frame, face obscured by long, stringy hair. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and its arms hung in a way that looked wrong, like they'd been bent the wrong way for too long. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My body was frozen. The thing tilted its head again, and the whisper came once more, now right in my ear, though no one was near me. "Don't leave." The lights went out completely. Total darkness. My breathing turned frantic. I fumbled for the emergency flashlight I kept behind the register. When I clicked it on, the beam cut across the store, illuminating everything, and everything looked normal. The shelves, the counter, the aisle, empty. But the shadow of that man in black appeared at the far end, just outside the light, standing perfectly still. I felt my chest tighten, and something in me screamed to get out. I ran to the door, threw it open, and the street was still empty, silent, untouched by anyone. I ran to my car, parked at the edge of the lot, unlocked the doors, and jumped inside. And then I saw him. Well, not him, the figure in black, standing at the edge of the lot, staring straight at me. His hat was tilted down, but I could feel his eyes drilling into me. He didn't move. I locked the doors, started the car, and floored it down the empty street. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and he was gone. Just gone. I told myself it was over. Maybe a hallucination. Maybe exhaustion. I had been working nights for 6 months, living off energy drinks and bad takeout, and sleep deprivation can do strange things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in that store with me. Something that wasn't human. The next night I called in sick, stayed home, locked every door. But the dreams started almost immediately. I'd wake up at 3:15 a.m., always 3:15 a.m., to the same whisper, "Don't leave." And the same shadowy figure, standing at the foot of my bed, not moving, not breathing. I stopped answering the phone, stopped opening doors for anyone. The dreams bled into the day. Shadows flickered at the corners of my vision. Every time I went near a convenience store, I felt it watching me, waiting. I quit the job after 2 more nights of near-constant hallucinations, calling in sick and staring at the clock until sunrise, praying for it to be over. Months later, curiosity got the better of me. I drove past the store during the day. It looked normal, open. Signs in the window advertised snacks and soda. I parked a block away and watched. And then I saw him, the man in black, walking inside, slowly, deliberately, disappearing into the store. I never went back. Never walked near that block again. But sometimes when I'm alone, working a different job, I catch a glimpse of something at the corner of my vision. A tall figure in black, standing, waiting, and I hear the whisper, faint, almost polite, "Don't leave." I started keeping a notebook after that, writing down everything I remembered from that night, every flicker of light, every whisper, every shadow. One night, as I wrote, I realized the entries were changing. Things I hadn't written before appeared on the pages, lines like, "You can't leave, not yet." I tried to burn the notebook, tried to flush it down the toilet, but it reappeared on my desk the next morning, pristine, as if untouched, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Not just at night. They followed me during the day. At work, in the grocery store, in the parking lot. Don't leave. A week later, I had to drive across town for a meeting. I took the highway. It was late, around 2 a.m. I saw something standing in the middle of the road ahead. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. The figure didn't move. Not human, not alive. It lifted its head, and I recognized the pale gray eyes. I swerved around it, heart hammering, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw multiple figures lining the shoulder of the highway, watching, waiting. I drove straight home, doors locked, engine running, and didn't stop. I've changed jobs twice since then, moved apartments, moved cities even. But no matter where I go, when the night grows deep, the shadows stretch longer and I hear the whisper. Not from a person, not from a phone. It comes from everywhere. Sometimes I think it started that first night at the store, that the figure chose me then, and no amount of moving or running can stop it. I try to rationalize, tell myself it's a mental thing, that it's a combination of stress and sleep deprivation. But rationality doesn't explain the shadows in my peripheral vision, the gray eyes watching me from alleyways, the cold that descends suddenly, inexplicably. I've considered therapy, medication, even hypnosis. Nothing helps. The whisper adapts, finds new ways to reach me. Sometimes it imitates voices I know. Sometimes it just hisses, guttural, almost pleased. Always the same message: don't leave. A few nights ago, I dreamed I was back in the store. The lights flickered, the temperature dropped, and the man in black stepped forward. This time he spoke clearly. His voice was calm, almost kind. You can't leave, not yet, not until you see. I woke up screaming. The room was dark, but I wasn't alone. At the foot of my bed, the figure stood, taller than the ceiling should allow, hat tilted low, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The whisper came again, a low, insistent reminder that no matter how far I drive, no matter how many locks I install, no matter how many cities I leave behind, it waits, always waiting. I don't know if anyone will believe me. Most people don't believe in the things that wait in shadows, the things that linger just beyond the edge of sight. But I know. I've seen, I've felt it in my bones, and I know this is only the beginning. Tonight, as I sit here writing this, the shadows press closer. I can feel the temperature drop. I can hear the softest of footsteps across the floor. And then the whisper, louder than it's ever been, don't leave. I think this time I won't be able to leave. Story, the end. The first night I started at the facility, I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. My name's Mark, and I work the night shift at a medical records storage facility in rural Ohio, about 15 miles outside Columbus. It's one of those massive warehouses that looks unassuming from the outside, but is a labyrinth inside. Endless rows of shelves stacked with boxes, filing cabinets, and archives, all labeled in meticulous order. Most nights are uneventful. Some nights are long and dull, and then there are nights like the one I'll never forget. I was 24, fresh out of college with a degree in business administration, which apparently qualifies you to file other people's medical histories. I took the night shift because I'm a night owl and because the pay was a few bucks more than daytime. When I arrived on my first night, I was shown around by the day supervisor, a tall woman named Karen. She seemed nice enough, all smiles and reassurance. She handed me a flashlight, a set of keys, and a radio, and reminded me to check in every hour. Then she left. The warehouse is enormous, 2 stories of steel shelving, catwalks, and staircases that creak when you walk. The fluorescent lights overhead are dim, many of them flickering. There's a faint smell of dust and mildew that never goes away. I made my way to my first assignment, checking a row of boxes for inventory errors. At first, everything was straightforward. I had my playlist going, the faint hum of the overhead lights, and the occasional clatter of a box being misplaced. About an hour into my shift, I noticed it. The sound of someone walking behind me. Not in a way you hear in a crowded place, but faint, soft, deliberate steps. I chalked it up to another night worker or maybe the creaking of the old floor. When I turned around, there was no one. The warehouse is huge, so it's possible someone could have been around the corner. I shook it off and kept working. Around 2 a.m., my radio crackled with static. I froze. We weren't supposed to be using the radio at night unless it was an emergency. The static turned into a voice, a faint whisper, almost impossible to understand. I leaned closer, pressing the talk button. "Hello?" I said. Nothing but static. Then, very clearly, a whisper. "Mark." I spun around, heart racing. The warehouse was empty. My flashlight's beam scanned the rows of boxes. Nothing. The whisper came again, just as clear. "Mark, help me." I froze. My first thought was that someone was messing with me, maybe one of the day staff leaving early, thinking it would be funny. But I was the only one in the building. I called Karen on the radio. "Karen? Are you there?" No response, just static. I decided to finish my inventory check and then call it a night. I was probably overreacting. The warehouse always had weird acoustics. Whispers can bounce and sound like they're coming from nowhere. About an hour later, while checking another aisle, I saw movement at the end of the row. A shadow. My flashlight flickered as I aimed it at the figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, like a person stretched out in a funhouse mirror, but faceless. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was my imagination, but the rationalizations didn't make the fear go away. I decided to call my friend on the phone to calm down, even though cell service was weak inside the warehouse. As I dialed, I noticed that the flashlight started dimming faster than it should. When I shined it down the aisle again, the boxes at the far end were toppled over, forming a path toward me. I didn't touch them. I just stepped back, trying to convince myself it was a coincidence. Then I heard it, a slow, dragging sound behind me. Something heavy being pulled across the concrete floor. I froze again. Slowly I turned my head, and there it was, the faceless figure at the end of the aisle, slowly advancing. I swear it didn't have a face. Just a smooth, pale void where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. It moved like a human, but not quite. Its movements were jerky, almost puppet-like. I started backing away, heart pounding, tripping over a box in my haste. I ran toward the main office, hoping to find a phone or some way to call for help. When I got there, the office door was wide open. It's normally locked at night. Inside, the lights were off, but I could see the silhouette of someone or something standing in the corner. I yelled, "Who's there?" The figure stepped forward. Even with the dim light, I could see that its body was emaciated, limbs unnaturally long, and its head tilted at an impossible angle. The whispering returned, louder this time, echoing around the office. "Mark, help!" I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away from that figure. I sprinted down aisles, blindly knocking over boxes, trying to find the exit. The sound of footsteps and dragging followed me, always just behind. My radio crackled again, and I swear I heard Karen's voice faintly. "Mark, don't." The exit was farther than I remembered. Every aisle seemed to stretch endlessly, rows of shelves that should have ended hours ago. I realized I wasn't in the same warehouse I'd entered. I had no idea where I was. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, casting shadows that moved independently, stretching across the walls like living things. I stumbled into a storage room, slammed the door, and pressed my back against it, gasping for air. My flashlight flickered one last time and went out, pitch black. Then I heard the whisper again, all around me, multiple voices now, overlapping, pleading, "Mark me, please, don't leave." I don't know how long I was in that room. I was curled on the floor, trying not to scream, trying to make sense of what I was seeing and hearing. Eventually, my phone lit up. I must have gotten a signal, and I dialed 911. I whispered into the phone, terrified that whoever or whatever was outside the door might hear me. The dispatcher asked for my location. I gave the address of the facility. A few minutes later, sirens wailed in the distance. I heard footsteps vanish instantly. When the police arrived, they found me cowering in the storage room, covered in dust, crying. They checked the warehouse, but everything was normal. No toppling boxes, no shadows, nothing out of place. The footage from the security cameras was corrupted for the hours I claimed to have been terrorized. The officers exchanged looks I didn't understand, and one of them muttered, "You okay, buddy?" I nodded, but I knew I wasn't. The next night, I was assigned to work again, despite my complaints. I asked for a day shift. HR said it wasn't possible. I couldn't quit, not yet. I stayed at a friend's apartment overnight, trying to convince myself it was all stress and imagination. But when I drove past the warehouse the next day, I saw a figure standing at one of the second-story windows, staring at the parking lot. I blinked, and it was gone. On my second night, I decided to stick close to the office and stay near the radio. At 1:42 a.m., the whispering returned. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Inside the building, outside, above, below. I shone my flashlight toward the source. The faceless figure stood near the shelves, watching. I yelled, "Leave me alone," and ran toward the exit. This time, the exit didn't open. It was locked, though I had the key. Every key I tried failed. The lights started flickering rapidly, and the air became cold, icy, like I was in a freezer. The whispering escalated to screams. "Mark, don't leave. Help us." I panicked, and in a desperate move, I ran to the stairs, planning to jump down to the lower level. As I descended, I noticed the walls of the stairwell were covered in writing, scrawled with some black substance I can't describe. Names, dates, pleas for help, and in the middle, one word repeated over and over, trapped. I reached the lower level, gasping, and saw dozens of faceless figures emerging from the shadows. Some moved normally, others twisted and contorted in ways no human should. They surrounded me, whispering my name. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My flashlight fell, rolling across the floor and illuminating a single detail: their hands. Long, bony, tipped with sharp nails, dragging across the concrete, reaching for me. I woke up on the floor of the office. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, the warehouse empty, normal. I wasn't sure how long I had been out. My radio was dead, my flashlight broken. My coworkers came in an hour later, asking why I hadn't checked in. I tried to explain, but my voice shook so badly no one could understand me. I quit that job the next day. I told HR I had a family emergency. They didn't ask questions. I never returned. But sometimes at night, when I'm alone, I swear I hear whispers. My name, soft, pleading, almost friendly. And I see shadows at the edge of my vision, twisting, stretching, watching. A few months later, I looked up the address of the facility. It had been closed down suddenly, cited for structural irregularities and safety hazards. Former employees warned that anyone who worked nights never stayed long. One security guard even told me he quit after a single shift because he saw things that weren't supposed to be there. I haven't worked nights since, and I never will. But sometimes I drive past that area at night, and the warehouse looks the same. Endless, dark, silent, and I feel eyes on me. I feel someone or something following me. I don't know if what I experienced was supernatural, psychological, or some mixture of both. But I know one thing. I heard voices no human should hear, saw things no human should see, and survived something that wasn't human. I'll never forget it. I've tried to tell friends, but they laugh it off. Night shift paranoia, they say. But you can't imagine the weight of being in a place that doesn't want you to leave, a place that stretches, shifts, and grows while you're inside, a place alive in a way that's malicious, patient, and aware. I sleep with lights on now, never alone. When I close my eyes, I sometimes see those faceless figures in the corner of my vision. I hear faint whispers just before I fall asleep, calling my name. And I know they are waiting, patient as ever, for the next time I pass by that warehouse. No one else I know has had a similar experience, at least not that they've told me. I've tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself it was stress, lack of sleep, or some rare neurological episode. But I know the truth. I know what I saw. If you ever work nights in a place like that, remember this. The building is watching, the shadows are listening, and the voices you hear might not be in your head. They might be calling you, inviting you, trapping you. I still have nightmares. I still wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I hear footsteps outside my bedroom door. And sometimes when I drive late at night, I see a warehouse in the distance that seems to stretch endlessly, lights flickering as if alive, and I can feel eyes on me. Some nights when the wind blows just right, I swear I hear whispers in my own home. Just one word, over and over. Mark. Story the end. It was a Wednesday night in late October when I started my shift at the manufacturing plant. I worked nights because I was trying to pay off some debt, and the overtime rates were higher. The plant itself was the kind of place you only hear about in old horror stories. Vast, dimly lit halls, machinery that groaned and clanked like it had been alive decades before I was born, and an ever-present smell of grease, oil, and faint rot. Most nights were uneventful, just me wandering the empty corridors with the occasional flicker of a light bulb overhead. But that night, everything felt off the second I clocked in. My manager, Tony, gave me a quick rundown of the night's schedule. Nothing unusual. Monitor the assembly lines, check the storage rooms, make sure the older machinery didn't seize up. He gave me a tight smile and left me to it, like he was already exhausted from something he didn't want to talk about. I shrugged it off. Tony was like that sometimes. Gruff, secretive, older than the plant itself. By the first hour, things were normal enough. The lights hummed overhead, the conveyor belts churned with their mechanical monotony, and the rhythmic beat of hydraulic presses filled the room. I walked the floor in my reflective vest, checking machinery, scribbling down readings in a clipboard. There was one part of the plant I never went to during the day, the far end of the west wing. The hallway leading there was narrow, dimly lit, and the machinery had long since been retired. Tony always said, "Stay out of there unless you have to," but the instruction was vague enough to be ignored. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard it. A sound I couldn't place at first, like metal scraping against metal, but not on any machine I could see. I froze mid-step, listening. The plant was normally noisy, but this scraping was deliberate enough that it stood out. I followed it toward the west wing. The air got colder the closer I got, and the smell changed. It wasn't just oil and metal anymore. It was damp, earthy, like wet soil, and something decaying beneath it. I rounded a corner and saw a door I had never noticed before. It was small, unmarked, and made of heavy steel. The scraping had stopped. I pressed my ear to the door, and I could hear breathing. Heavy, uneven, like someone or something was inside. I knocked softly, half expecting Tony to yell at me for wandering. The breathing stopped. Silence stretched on for what felt like minutes. I considered walking away, telling myself I was imagining things, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door. Inside was a stairwell leading down into darkness. I shone my flashlight down. The steps were old concrete, cracked and worn. The smell was stronger now, and I realized it was the smell of rot. My stomach turned, but I started descending, flashlight shaking in my hand. At the bottom, I saw a long, narrow hallway, barely lit by a single flickering bulb. The walls were damp, covered in mold, and then I saw them, marks on the walls. Deep, claw-like scratches running the length of the hallway. Some were fresh, red in the dim light. My heart rate spiked, but I kept moving, telling myself maybe it was some vandalism or maintenance work gone wrong. The scraping started again, now from the darkness ahead. I swallowed hard and continued down the hallway, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the flashlight caught something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow moving against the wall. I spun toward it, but there was nothing there. Then I saw the room at the end. The door was open, and inside I could just make out shapes in the darkness. I stepped closer. The flashlight flickered. My breath hitched. The room was filled with machinery I didn't recognize, old equipment that had clearly been abandoned for decades, and scattered across the floor were bodies. Not dead in the usual sense, just broken, disassembled. Limbs twisted unnaturally, faces frozen in expressions of terror. My stomach churned, and I stumbled back. A whisper floated through the air. Just one, clear. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. It wasn't coming from anywhere in particular. It was inside my head, in my chest. The flashlight went out completely. Panic set in. I fumbled for my phone to use its light, and when I did, I saw it. A figure, crouched in the corner. Human? Not human? Hard to say. Its skin was pale, stretched too tight across its face. Its eyes, empty, black pits, stared directly at me. And then it moved, faster than anything humanly possible, straight toward me. I ran. Stairwell, hallway, steps, all the way back to the plant floor. I didn't stop until I hit the main assembly line, and even then, I kept moving, glancing behind me constantly. But when I looked back, there was nothing. The west wing was empty, quiet, just the hum of machines. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even write down the readings I needed to. I told Tony what I had seen. He didn't laugh, didn't dismiss me. He just nodded, pale. "You saw it," he said. "Most people don't. The night shift, it brings them out." I didn't understand. "Out of what?" I asked. He shook his head. "Some things never leave. They just wait." The rest of my shift passed in a blur. Every shadow, every sound had me jumping. When morning came, I left the plant shaking, swearing I'd never work nights again. But when I returned the next week to finish my paycheck, the west wing was gone. Literally gone. A wall had been built where the hallway had been, and no one else remembered the old stairwell. Tony just shrugged. "Some things are better left alone," he said. "Ben, I thought about leaving it there, telling myself it was stress, overwork, imagination, but I couldn't. The plant had been alive that night, alive in a way I couldn't explain, and the thing in the basement wasn't normal." Months passed. I moved to another city, got a new job, tried to forget, but the dreams started. Every night I'd be back in that hallway, the scratching, the smell, the eyes, always watching, always waiting. And then, about a year later, I saw a news article online about a fire at a plant in rural Ohio, completely destroyed. No one survived the night shift. Investigators couldn't explain the damage, said the reports were inconsistent. But the description, it matched everything I had seen. That was the moment I realized it didn't matter where I went. Whatever I saw in that basement, whatever followed the night shift, it didn't stay confined to that plant. It followed me, watched me, waiting for me to return. And sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear the scraping again. I tried to tell friends, coworkers, therapists. They all looked at me like I had lost my mind. Night shifts are rough, they said. Sleep deprivation does weird things. But they don't know. They weren't there. They didn't see the bodies, the hallway, the thing in the corner with the empty eyes. One night, about 6 months after I moved, I got a call from a blocked number. No voice, just breathing. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I hung up, trying to shake it off. It happened again the next night and the night after that. I realized it was following me, tracking me, just like it had at the plant. I started sleeping with lights on, doors locked, checking every shadow, but even then I could feel it, always there, just out of sight. My apartment became a cage. I stopped leaving after dark. People noticed. Friends asked questions. I lied, said I had anxiety, said I was tired. But they didn't understand. The night shift had given me a gift, or a curse. I could see what lingered in the shadows, what the world ignored, and it remembered me. Last week, I woke up to my bedroom door slowly creaking open. I live alone. No one has keys but me. My heart stopped. I froze. And then I saw it standing in the doorway, as tall and thin as the shadow in the basement. Its eyes, those empty black pits, locked on me. The scraping started again, coming from its claws, or maybe from the walls themselves. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. And then it whispered. Not a word, just a sensation deep in my chest, pushing fear into every corner of my body. You shouldn't have left. I haven't slept since. Every reflective surface shows it, sometimes just for a fraction of a second. Every floorboard creak, every HVAC rumble, I hear the scratching beneath it. I know now that some night shifts aren't just work, they're invitations. And once you accept, once you see, it never ends. I quit my job years ago. I moved states, I changed my number, but the night follows me. Always. Waiting for the next shift, the next shadow. And the thing in the doorway, it waits, patient, silent, eyes always on me because the night doesn't forget. I'm writing this now because I can't take it anymore. If anyone ever works a night shift alone in an old industrial building, take this as a warning. The floors, the machines, the empty hallways, they're not empty. Some things never leave. And if you hear scraping when no one else is there, don't look. Don't open doors. Don't follow it. Whatever it is, it will be waiting. And if it finds you, it won't let go. I hear it again now. Scrape, scrape. I have to hide. Story the end. It was the fall of 2018 when I took a job at a 24-hour diner off Interstate 74 in Illinois. The place sat right between long stretches of cornfields, surrounded by miles of nothing. I needed money, and night shifts paid better, so I told myself it wouldn't be that bad. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first few nights were fine. The diner was quiet after midnight, just a few truckers stopping in for coffee, the occasional lost traveler looking for directions. I worked the counter, wiped tables, brewed coffee, and listened to old country songs playing faintly from the jukebox that hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The neon sign outside buzzed constantly, flickering between open and pen. The only other person working nights was Roy, the cook. He was in his late 50s, quiet but kind. He smoked constantly and never said much unless you asked him something directly. One night around 2 a.m., a heavy rainstorm rolled in, the kind that drowned out everything with its noise. I remember the thunder shaking the windows as I poured coffee for a truck driver who looked exhausted. Then Roy called out from the kitchen, "You see that car?" I looked out the front window and saw headlights through the rain, parked on the far edge of the lot. It wasn't unusual for someone to stop there for a while before coming in, but what was strange was that the lights never went off. They stayed on for hours. By 3 a.m., the rain had stopped, but the car was still there. No one had come in, no one had left. I asked Roy if we should check on it, but he just shook his head. "If they need help, they'll come to us. Don't go out there." I tried to focus on cleaning the counter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I glanced out the window, those headlights seemed a little brighter, a little closer. Around 3:30, the power flickered. The jukebox shut off mid-song, the lights dimmed, and the neon sign outside buzzed louder than ever. And that's when I saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the glass, half lit by the headlights. It was tall, too tall, and thin, like its limbs were stretched wrong. Its head tilted to the side as if it were studying me. I blinked, and it was gone. Just rainwater streaking down the window again. "Roy," I said, my voice shaking. "Did you see that?" He didn't answer. I walked into the kitchen and found him standing still, facing the back door. "Something's out there," he said quietly. "I saw it too." We stood there for a minute, listening. There was no wind, no rain, just silence. Then faintly, a knock on the back door. 3 slow knocks. I froze. Roy didn't move. The knocks came again, louder this time. Then a voice, low and drawn out, said, "Please, let me in." Something about that voice made my stomach twist. It sounded wrong, like someone trying to imitate human speech, but not quite getting it right. Roy whispered, "Don't open it." We waited. The voice came again, closer now. "Please, I'm cold." Then the sound of something dragging against the metal door. I looked through the small square window, but there was nothing there. Just the dark. We backed away slowly, grabbed our phones, but neither of us had service. I tried the landline. It was dead. At that moment, the lights went out completely. The diner was plunged into total darkness, except for the faint glow of the headlights from outside. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like I could hear it echoing through the room. Roy grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the dining area. "Stay behind me," he said. We moved slowly through the dark, stepping over chairs and tables. Then the beam of the flashlight caught something, wet footprints on the tile floor, leading from the front door to the counter. But the front door had been locked. I had checked it myself. We followed the prints, and that's when we heard breathing. Not ours, something else. Deep, ragged, too close. It was coming from behind the counter. Roy shined the light over it, and for a split second I saw it. A figure crouched behind the counter, its back hunched, limbs too long, skin slick like it had been drenched in water. Its head turned toward the light, and I saw its face, or what should have been a face. It didn't have eyes or a nose, just a wide, stretched mouth full of teeth that were too many and too sharp. Roy dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor and rolled away, the beam spinning wildly across the walls. I grabbed his arm and we ran toward the kitchen, slamming the door behind us. We pushed one of the metal prep tables against it, hearts hammering in our chests. For a while, all we could hear was the sound of that thing moving around out there, slow, dragging footsteps and that wet, guttural breathing. Then, nothing. Silence. We waited until sunrise before daring to move the table. When we stepped out, the diner looked normal. The lights were back on, the jukebox playing again. No footprints, no broken glass, no sign of anything. The car was gone. Roy quit that day. He didn't even come back for his paycheck. I stayed another week, mostly because I needed the money. But every night around 3 a.m., I'd feel it, that same cold dread. Sometimes the jukebox would stop mid-song. Sometimes the lights would flicker. And once, I swear I saw those headlights again, parked at the far edge of the lot. I didn't last much longer. The final straw came a week later when I was closing up just before dawn. I went out to take the trash to the dumpster behind the diner. The air was thick with fog, visibility barely 10 feet. As I turned back toward the building, I noticed handprints on the windows, long, thin fingers streaking downward as if something had been pressing its hands against the glass from the inside. When I went back in, the power flickered and the jukebox started playing by itself. No one was near it. The song? Stand By Me. But the record was warped, the sound slow and distorted, the singer's voice melting into something inhuman. I left that night and never went back. The diner closed down a few months later. The owners said it wasn't making enough money, but I think that's only part of the truth. I drove past it once last year. The sign was gone, the windows boarded up. But as I passed, my headlights caught something standing in the doorway, tall, motionless, watching. Sometimes, late at night, I dream I'm back there. The jukebox is playing, the neon sign flickering, and outside, headlights shine through the rain. And then I hear it 3 slow knocks on the back door, followed by that same voice, whispering softly, "Please, let me in. Story the end. It started as any ordinary night shift in the ER would. Quiet at first, then a slow trickle of emergencies that tested patience more than skill. I was working the graveyard shift at St. Mary's Hospital in rural Ohio, a place where the night often dragged like wet cement, and the few hours between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. were known among the staff as the witching hours, for a reason most people don't understand until they've been there. I had been assigned to the trauma unit that night, which was usually dead quiet unless someone came in with a serious accident. The kind of serious accident that made your stomach knot, the kind that didn't wait for anyone to be ready. The night began normally enough. I arrived at 10 p.m., grabbed my badge, and clocked in. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, a mix that never failed to make my stomach twist. My coworker, an older nurse named Carla, gave me a tired smile as she handed over the patient charts. "Nothing weird yet," she said, and I laughed nervously. "Just wait," she added almost in a whisper. "You'll see. Nights like this, they get under your skin." I didn't know what she meant at the time, but I would. Around midnight, the first patient arrived, a man in his late 30s who had been in a minor car accident. Nothing serious, some scrapes, bruises, a broken wrist, but the thing that caught my attention was his eyes. Dark, almost black and wide open in a kind of terrified blankness. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond to questions, and his body shook as if cold or scared. We stabilized him, set his wrist, and monitored him. But his gaze never left the ceiling, his pupils dilated like a deer caught in headlights. It was unsettling, but I chalked it up to shock and trauma. Hours passed slowly. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, humming like they were alive. The ER had its own rhythm at night. The quiet punctuated by beeping monitors and the occasional squeak of a gurney. Around 2 a.m., another patient was wheeled in, and this one changed the entire atmosphere. She was a woman in her early 20s, pale and trembling, mumbling incoherently about someone following her. Her eyes darted wildly around the room as if she could see things no one else could. She kept whispering, "It's here, it won't leave, I can't get away." Her words made the hair on my arms stand up. Carla and I tried to calm her down, but the more we spoke, the more agitated she became. She began thrashing, shouting about shadows moving on their own, about figures standing in corners, and about a man who shouldn't exist. The security footage from the entrance showed nothing unusual, just the night janitor sweeping the hallways. But every time I glanced at the corner of the trauma room, I could swear I saw a shadow flicker. The night went on, each hour more unnerving than the last. Patients came in with odd, sometimes unexplainable injuries. A man with a burn pattern that didn't match any accident, a child with bruises in a strange geometric pattern, and an elderly woman who whispered about people she had seen die decades ago, describing their deaths in precise, horrifying detail. It didn't make sense, but everyone on the night shift was starting to feel it, the sensation that we weren't alone. By 4 a.m., I was alone in the trauma unit for the first time in hours. Carla had stepped out to help another nurse with paperwork. That's when I saw it. Or them. A figure tall and thin, standing just outside the trauma room, in the hallway, bathed in pale emergency exit light. Its back was to me, but I could feel its gaze, piercing through the fluorescent hum. My voice caught in my throat. "Hello?" I called softly, but it didn't move, not even a twitch. I fumbled for the panic button on my belt, my fingers shaking. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. No footsteps, no sound, nothing. The monitor alarm suddenly shrieked, and I ran back into the trauma room to find the patients, every single one of them, gone. Beds empty, charts missing, IVs dangling. My heart pounded. I ran through the hallways calling out, but the only sounds were the buzzing lights and the faint echo of my own voice. I rushed to the security office, desperate for footage. The screens flickered, then showed the trauma room empty. But in the corner of one feed, a shadowy figure lingered, just out of focus. It moved too fast to be human, gliding, hovering almost, before vanishing into the wall. By now, Carla returned, noticing my panic. "What happened?" she asked. But before I could explain, the PA system crackled to life with static, and a voice whispered, "You shouldn't be here. None of you should." The sound was low, distorted, almost like the walls themselves were speaking. We spent the next hour checking every room, every hallway, every stairwell. Nothing. Not a trace of the missing patients, not a hint of the figures I'd seen. But the feeling didn't leave. Every shadow felt heavier. Every corner seemed to stretch longer than it should. When morning came and the day shift arrived, the hospital seemed normal again, almost too normal. The night shift staff swapped stories, some laughing nervously, some pale and silent. No one mentioned the missing patients or the shadows. Weeks passed, and the memory haunted me. Then the reports came in. Missing people. Patients who had been admitted overnight, but whose files had vanished, whose families were never contacted. One by one, their cases were quietly buried, lost to clerical error, the official report said. No one at the hospital would talk about it, and any attempt to bring it up was met with a cold stare or a nervous laugh. Months later, I was on another graveyard shift, this time in the maternity ward. A nurse named Sam, new and bright-eyed, had just started. We were charting newborns when a nurse from the previous shift ran in, pale and panicked. "You have to leave," she shouted. "They're here." Before I could ask what she meant, the lights flickered, plunging the ward into intermittent darkness. The babies in their bassinets began crying simultaneously, a loud, synchronized wail that set every nerve on edge. I looked toward the corridor and saw them again. Tall, shadowy figures, moving too fast to be human, hovering just at the edge of vision. Sam screamed, frozen, and I grabbed her hand, trying to pull her into a safe room. The figures didn't follow physically, but their presence pressed down on us, suffocating, whispering in a language that made my teeth ache. That night, I ran through every protocol I knew. Locked doors, security alarms, emergency lighting, but the figures didn't disappear. When morning finally came, we were alive, but changed. Both Sam and I quit that day. We couldn't explain what we saw, couldn't tell anyone without sounding insane, and the hospital itself seemed complicit in the silence. Over the next year, I kept track of news reports, local police logs, and rumors. St. Mary's had a history of strange disappearances, always clustered around the graveyard shifts. Staff who stayed too long at night sometimes vanished. Patients admitted overnight occasionally didn't exist in any record after check-in. I can't explain what I saw. Scientific reason fails here, logic fails, but I know what I experienced was real. Shadows that weren't shadows, voices that weren't human, people vanishing without trace. I've never returned to a night shift, and I never will. But the memory follows me, a weight in the corner of every dark room, every silent night. Sometimes, when the lights flicker or a hallway stretches just a little too long, I swear I can feel them again, hovering at the edge of sight. Waiting, watching. And I know, without a doubt, that the next person on graveyard duty at St. Mary's might not be so lucky. I have friends who tried to document it, who set up cameras and audio recorders. Some captured shadows moving unnaturally, silhouettes that bent the laws of physics, and whispers and voices that no human could make. Others never came back to tell the story. The few who did quit immediately, terrified into silence. The hospital, for all its reputation as a place of healing, becomes a trap at night, a liminal space where reality warps, where things that shouldn't exist take notice of those foolish enough to be awake. Now, years later, I live far from Ohio. I keep the lights on at night. I check every dark corner before I go to bed. Every time a hospital story hits the news about missing overnight patients, my stomach knots. I think of the tall shadows, the silent whispers, the empty rooms where the sick and injured vanished without a trace. And I remember the first terrified eyes of that man staring blankly at the ceiling, already seeing what was coming. Some nights, I dream about being back at St. Mary's, walking the empty halls during the graveyard shift. The fluorescent lights flicker, the monitors beep in impossible rhythms, and the shadows glide silently in the corners, waiting, always waiting. And I wake up, heart racing, knowing that what I saw wasn't a hallucination, and that the night shift doesn't end when your shift ends. It lingers. It watches. It waits for the next unlucky soul to be alone in the dark. Even now, I avoid hospitals at night if I can. I warn friends, colleagues, anyone who will listen. The night shift is more than overtime. It's a doorway. And once you've seen what's behind it, there's no unseeing. The truth is, people will never believe me. They'll call me paranoid, overworked, or insane, but I know the truth. I've seen the impossible happen. The hospital at night is alive with things that defy reason. And every time someone clocks in for the graveyard shift, those things are there just beyond the edge of sight, waiting for their chance. No story, no record, no camera can capture the full reality of it. The horror is in the presence, in the suffocating awareness that something is watching, always, when the world sleeps. And I learned the hard way that sometimes what you think is quiet, what you think is empty, is actually alive with the unexplainable, the horrifying, and the impossible. Years may pass, the hospital may renovate, staff may change, and patients may come and go, but the night shift is eternal, and whatever waits in those darkened halls doesn't forget. I know because I saw it, and it saw me. Story the end. It was one of those nights where the city felt dead, even though it was humming somewhere just beyond the windows. I had been working the night shift at the hospital for a few months, mostly in the telemetry unit, monitoring patients recovering from surgeries or dealing with chronic conditions. My shift started at 11 p.m., and usually the first couple of hours were uneventful, charting, checking monitors, and making rounds. That night, however, something felt off as soon as I walked in. The fluorescent lights buzzed just a little louder than normal, and the usual hum of machines had a different edge, almost like a low growl underneath the beeps and whirs. I shrugged it off, attributing it to being tired. My coworker, a seasoned nurse named Diane, was already at the nurse's station, scrolling through patient charts on her computer. She didn't look up when I walked in. "You okay?" I asked, pouring myself some coffee from the thermos I always kept in my locker. She didn't answer. I frowned and walked closer. Her eyes were locked on the screen, but her expression was frozen in a tense, tight-lipped frown. I waved my hand in front of her face. "Diane?" She blinked, like she'd just realized I was there. Yeah, I'm fine. Just something weird with the monitors tonight," she muttered, barely audible. I glanced at the monitors. Most of the patients were stable, their vitals normal. But then I noticed one reading that made my stomach twist. Room 307. The heart monitor flatlined for a full minute before abruptly returning to a normal rhythm. That was impossible. If a patient flatlined for that long, the alarms would have gone off, and we would have been scrambling. I checked the chart. Mr. Johnson, an elderly man recovering from a minor heart surgery, was listed as stable, and nothing in the notes mentioned any complications. I shook my head and went to check on him, thinking maybe the monitor glitched. As I approached the room, I felt the first real unease of the night. The room was colder than usual. I stepped inside, and the small space felt different, heavier somehow, like the air itself was thick. Mr. Johnson was asleep, breathing evenly, but I could swear I felt something in the corner of the room, something watching. I blinked. Nothing. I checked the monitor again. All readings were normal. "Must be tired," I muttered to myself. I turned and left the room, but as I did, I thought I saw a shadow flit past the door. My skin prickled. By 1 a.m., the hospital was quieter than usual. The janitorial staff had finished their rounds, and the occasional cleaning cart in the hall was the only distraction. That's when the first call came in from the emergency department. A patient had come in under unusual circumstances. A young man, early 20s, had been found wandering near the river, incoherent and covered in scratches. No ID, no family, no explanation of how he ended up there. He was admitted to a room on the other side of the floor. I was assigned to check on him. His chart was bare, just a few scribbled notes from the triage nurse. When I opened the door, I expected a typical case, shock, confusion. But what I saw stopped me cold. The man was sitting on the bed, completely still, staring straight at the wall across from him. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and dark, almost black. His hands were shaking, but his voice didn't come. I stepped closer. "Hey, I'm Nurse Carter. Can you tell me your name?" He didn't respond. I glanced at the monitor. His vitals were off the charts. Heart rate spiking, blood pressure erratic. I radioed Diane. "Vitals are crazy. Room 412, you need to see this." She appeared a few minutes later, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. She took one look at the patient and whispered, "Shh, don't make him panic." I frowned. "Why?" Before she could answer, the man's head snapped toward me. I swear he didn't move his body, just his head. His mouth opened slowly, impossibly wide, and he let out a low guttural sound that didn't make sense. It was almost human, but layered with something else, something darker. I stumbled back. The monitor went haywire. Alarms blaring, the red lights flashing. But when Diane and I tried to call for help, the radio didn't work. The phone lines were dead. It was as if the entire wing had been cut off from the rest of the hospital. I grabbed the man's arm to steady him, but my hand passed right through. I recoiled. Diane's eyes were wide, her face pale. "It's happening," she whispered. "Happening? What's happening?" I demanded. Before she could answer, the man turned to the wall again, and the shadow behind him stretched, filling the corner of the room, writhing like smoke. The temperature dropped even further. My breath came out in visible puffs. My phone, which I had been trying to use as a flashlight, flickered and died. I don't know what Diane did, but she muttered something under her breath and clapped her hands sharply. The shadow recoiled, like it had been burned. The man's body slumped forward, still alive, but he was finally breathing normally. I was shaking. Diane turned to me, her voice trembling. "You're lucky he's new. Sometimes they get attached to people. Some energies linger where the living are weak." "What the hell are you talking about?" I said, my voice cracking. She didn't answer. Instead, she went to the door and locked it from the inside. "We have to keep him here until the sun comes up," she said. By 3 a.m., I thought I might be losing my mind. Every few minutes, I could hear whispers through the hallways, just outside the nurse's station. The monitors would spike for no reason. Lights flickered in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. I was exhausted, terrified, but I couldn't leave. I was trapped on this floor with whatever had attached itself to that young man. Around 4:15 a.m., I went to check Mr. Johnson's room again. The old man was awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at me with the same wide-eyed intensity I had seen in the young man. I froze. He smiled slowly, unnervingly. "Why are you here?" he whispered, his voice raspy. "You don't belong here." Before I could respond, the lights in his room went out completely. In the pitch black, I heard the faint shuffle of movement and then a soft thud on the floor. My heart was pounding in my ears. I fumbled for my flashlight, turned it on, and shone it across the room. Mr. Johnson was gone. Gone. I ran to the nurse's station, but Diane wasn't there. The monitors were all flatlined, not one patient showing life. My stomach turned. I tried the radio again. Silence. My phone wouldn't dial out. The air smelled different, acrid, and damp. I realized then I wasn't alone. Something was moving around me, brushing past my arms, circling, testing me. I grabbed a crash cart and started moving down the hallway, trying doors, checking rooms. Some rooms were empty. Some weren't. Shadows seemed to twist unnaturally, moving against the corners of my vision. I swear one patient sat up, turned their head fully toward me, and then disappeared when I blinked. By 5 a.m., I had barricaded myself in a storage closet. I was shaking uncontrollably, hyperventilating. The sounds outside were getting louder. Whispers, thuds, the scraping of metal on tile. It sounded like footsteps, hundreds of them, circling the hallway. But when I peeked, nothing was there. I don't know how long I was in that closet. Minutes? Hours? Time lost all meaning. When the first rays of sunlight crept through the high windows, the sound stopped abruptly. The shadows receded. The monitors blinked back to life. Diane appeared at the door, holding a clipboard, calm as if nothing had happened. "Morning," she said casually. "You look like hell." I stumbled out, looking around. The patients were all alive, as if nothing had occurred. Mr. Johnson was in bed, awake, sipping water like normal. The young man was asleep, breathing evenly. Nothing was amiss. I tried to speak, to tell Diane what had happened, but she shook her head. "Don't. Some things aren't meant to be seen. You'll be fine. Just don't stay alone next time." I left the hospital that morning feeling hollow, like some part of me had been left behind. I tried talking to other nurses, doctors, staff, anyone who worked the night shift, but no one would discuss anything unusual. It was as if the night I had experienced had never happened. I quit a week later. Years later, I still wake up in the middle of the night, hearing whispers and footsteps in my apartment, shadows moving just beyond my vision. Every now and then, I get calls from hospitals, nursing homes, asking if I want to return for night shifts. I never do. I know what I saw. I know it wasn't a hallucination. Whatever it was real, and it's still out there, waiting in the shadows of every night shift, feeding on the tired, the weak, the alone, and I know one day, if I'm not careful, it will come back for me. Story the end. It was the middle of January when I took the night shift at the Horizon Data Center in rural Kansas. I had recently moved from Chicago after a messy breakup, needing a change of pace and a job that kept me busy. The data center wasn't glamorous. It was a sprawling concrete building in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by cornfields that looked like an ocean of gray in the winter night. I'd applied after seeing the ad online, offering a generous night differential, and the manager, a wiry man named Doyle, seemed desperate enough to hire me without much scrutiny. The first week was uneventful. The night shift was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and my only responsibilities were monitoring the servers, checking security feeds, and making sure the backup generators were operational. There were only two other night employees, Doyle, who usually disappeared into his office, and Claire, a temp who handled some of the database checks. Most nights, it was just me, the hum of servers, and the fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently, creating long shadows along the narrow corridors. I began noticing odd things almost immediately. It started small, things like the coffee machine turning on by itself or the motion sensors triggering lights when no one was around. I told myself it was probably electrical issues or me being on edge. Night shifts are brutal on your mind, after all. But then it escalated. One night, around 2 a.m., I was walking down the long corridor to check on a server in the West Wing when I saw a figure at the far end. At first, I thought it was Claire, but as I got closer, I realized it was taller, more hunched than a normal person, and it didn't move naturally. Its head turned toward me at an impossible angle, and for a second I swore its eyes glowed faintly red in the dim light. I froze, and then it disappeared. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and tried to rationalize it. Lack of sleep, shadows playing tricks, maybe even a reflection of the red emergency light. I laughed nervously to myself, shook my head, and returned to the main control room. The next morning, I mentioned it to Doyle. He frowned and muttered something about old wiring and shadows, clearly not wanting to discuss it further. Claire, however, looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "You saw it too, didn't you?" I was taken aback. She said she'd seen similar figures at the far ends of the halls, always in the same areas, always watching. But neither of us could explain why. Doyle avoided the topic entirely, acting like we were exaggerating or imagining things. Over the next few weeks, the incidents intensified. Footsteps echoed in empty hallways. Server racks would be open with screens showing garbled data, despite no one being near them. Once, I was in the break room when the vending machine rattled violently, dispensing snacks on its own, and the lights flickered so violently I swore the walls were breathing. Claire began bringing an extra flashlight, claiming the corridors sometimes went dark when you least expect it. The real horror began about a month into my shift. It was a Thursday, one of the coldest nights of January, and the wind outside howled like a pack of wolves. I had been monitoring the server feeds for hours when I noticed something unusual on the security cameras. A man in a dark coat standing outside the building. At first, I thought he was a maintenance worker, but he wasn't moving, wasn't even walking. He just stood there, staring at the cameras. I zoomed in, and that's when I realized his face was completely featureless. A smooth, pale void where his eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. I gasped and called Claire. She came running, and when she looked at the screen, she went pale. "It's him," she whispered. "He's been outside before, always on nights like this." We debated calling the police, but Doyle dismissed it, claiming we were overworked and imagining things. That night, the figure stayed there for hours, motionless like a shadow etched against the wind. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop staring at the cameras. When dawn finally arrived, he vanished, as if he had never been there. Things got worse. Equipment began failing in ways that made no sense. One night, all the server lights turned red simultaneously, accompanied by a high-pitched screeching noise that made my ears bleed. Claire was in tears, and I couldn't convince her to stay in the building. She quit shortly afterwards, saying she couldn't handle the things that watch us at night. I was left alone. That was when I started noticing the smells. A metallic, iron-like scent that would appear suddenly, lingering in the air for minutes before disappearing. Sometimes it was accompanied by the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, coming from the dark corners of the server room. I'd check every corner, every closet, every maintenance tunnel, but there was never anyone there. Yet I always felt observed, watched, like something was calculating every movement I made. One night I heard it, whispering. It came from the ventilation shafts above. At first I thought it was the wind, but then the whispers formed words, low, guttural, distorted. Leave, 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 leave. I froze, heart hammering, and called Doyle. His voice was calm, too calm. It's just your mind, kid. You're alone, that's all. But he didn't sound convincing. I started recording the whispers on my phone, trying to prove I wasn't losing my mind. When I played it back in the morning, there was nothing, just silence. The turning point came one night around 3 a.m. I was walking past the maintenance room when I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. I spun around, but no one was there. The corridor was empty, silent, except for the hum of the servers. But when I glanced back, I saw muddy footprints appearing on the polished concrete floor, stretching from the maintenance room to the main hall. And at the end of the hall, just barely visible in the flickering light, was the faceless man staring directly at me. My body froze, every muscle locked in terror. Then he vanished. The footprints remained. I stopped trying to rationalize. Sleep-deprived paranoia was no longer a plausible explanation. I started documenting everything, keeping logs of times, sounds, lights, and sightings. My notes filled notebook after notebook. The faceless man was always there on the coldest nights, always near the maintenance tunnels, always disappearing when approached. Equipment failures, whispers, cold hands, shadows stretching unnaturally across walls. It was all connected, and yet Doyle refused to acknowledge it. Then the disappearances started. The cleaning staff who came at night for a few hours began vanishing. Their shifts were scheduled, they never returned, and Doyle made excuses. They probably quit without notice, don't worry about it. But the security footage told a different story. People walking alone in the corridors would stop suddenly, look around, and then simply vanish. Not running, not hiding, not leaving the building, just disappearing. I watched it happen to one of the janitors I had known for years. He never reappeared. I tried contacting the authorities, but they were dismissive. The building was privately owned, remote, and in the middle of nowhere. There were no reports of anything unusual in the area. They suggested I speak to a mental health professional. I laughed bitterly to myself and returned to the building. There was no way I could leave, not yet. I needed answers. One night I decided to confront whatever was haunting the place. I armed myself with a flashlight, my phone, and a heavy wrench. I waited in the maintenance tunnels until around 2 a.m., heart pounding, ears straining for the faintest sound. At exactly 2:17, I heard it. The slow, deliberate footsteps, followed by whispering. The shadows at the end of the tunnel seemed to stretch, morph, and solidify into a figure. The faceless man stood there, more imposing than ever. I swung my flashlight toward him, and for the first time I saw movement in the void where his face should have been. Something writhing like hundreds of tiny shadows crawling beneath a thin sheet of skin. I yelled, swung the wrench, and the shadows recoiled as if in pain. The air grew colder, thick, almost tangible. The servers began sparking, lights flickering violently. I could hear Claire's voice, distorted, screaming from somewhere in the building. Then everything went silent. Complete, suffocating silence. I dropped the wrench, my flashlight clattering to the floor. When I picked it up again, the man was gone. But on the wall behind me, words were scratched in deep gouges, letters so jagged I could barely read them. You belong here. I didn't sleep that night. I left the building at dawn, drove home, and tried to convince myself it was over. But the next night I received a call on my home phone, an old landline, the kind I hadn't used in years. A voice, cold and hollow, whispered, "You belong here." Then the line went dead. I didn't answer again. I tried quitting the job, but Doyle insisted it wasn't an option. He said the company had strict policies, that quitting without notice would result in legal action. I realized then he wasn't just a manager, he was part of it, part of whatever this place was. The following weeks became a blur. I stayed on night shifts, documenting everything, hiding from the faceless man whenever I could, avoiding the maintenance tunnels entirely. Sometimes I thought I saw Doyle's shadow morphing in the corner of my vision, moving unnaturally, watching, always watching. I started noticing people on the security footage who weren't there during the day, figures with distorted limbs, faces melting, staring into the camera with empty eyes. I tried showing the footage to coworkers who came during the day, but by the time they saw it, the distortions were gone, leaving only ordinary, empty hallways. One night, about 3 months in, I was alone in the server room when the lights went out entirely. The emergency lights flickered on for a brief second, casting long shadows. I could hear the whispering again, this time from every direction. Stay, stay. The temperature dropped dramatically, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Then I felt it, a presence behind me, pressing me against the server racks. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The shadow pressed closer, and I could feel its weight, heavy, suffocating. Then it whispered directly into my ear, a voice that sounded like every person I had ever known, twisted into a low growl, "You're ours." I blacked out. When I woke, the lights were on. The servers hummed normally, and Doyle's office door was closed just as if nothing had happened. But my phone, my personal phone, was gone. In its place was a small black device humming softly. I picked it up, and the screens lit up with images of every night I had ever worked at Horizon Data Center. Every shadow, every whisper, every sighting captured, stored, analyzed. I realized then that the building wasn't just haunted, it was alive. It watched, it cataloged, it waited, and anyone who worked there became part of it. I submitted my resignation the next day. Doyle smiled, said he understood, and shook my hand. But as I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. There, in the frozen, snowy fields behind the building, the faceless man stood, motionless, watching me leave. I never returned. I never worked another night shift. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I hear the whispering again. And sometimes, when I look out my window, I think I see a figure in the distance, watching, waiting, ensuring I never forget. The job was supposed to be temporary, a paycheck and some time to myself. Instead, it became a nightmare I can't escape. I still have dreams of the halls, the faceless man, the cold presence, and the way the building seemed to breathe around me. I've tried to tell people, but no one believes me. Even now, writing this, I can hear it. The faint, almost imperceptible hum of machinery, whispering my name. And I know deep down that the moment I stop paying attention, it will find me again. Because once you've worked the night shift at Horizon, the building doesn't let go. Story the end. It was the kind of cold that crept into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. The kind that made every fluorescent light hum sound sharper, every echo in the empty hallways stretch just a little too long. I was working the night shift at a 24-hour gas station just outside Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't exactly the job I had dreamed of, but it paid the bills. Most nights were uneventful. Truckers grabbing coffee, regulars coming in for cigarettes, and the occasional lost traveler asking for directions. But that one night changed everything I thought I knew about what it meant to be alone after dark. It was a Tuesday night, the kind where time feels like it's moving backward. The lot was empty, except for a single 18-wheeler idling off to the side, its engine rumbling low and steady. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed relentlessly, casting everything in a pale, sickly glow. I had just refilled the coffee pots when the phone behind the counter rang. That wasn't unusual. What was strange was that no one ever called that phone after midnight. I picked it up. Silence. Then, faintly, a sound. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing. "Hello?" I said. Nothing. Just that long, raspy breath. If this is a prank, it's not funny. Still nothing. Then, finally, a whisper so soft it barely registered. "Don't look outside." I froze. The hairs on my arms stood straight up. "Who is this?" I asked again, but the line went dead. I tried to shake it off, probably just some local kids screwing around, but when I turned to glance at the window, I noticed something strange. The truck parked outside, its headlights were off, but the cab light was on, and I could see a figure sitting inside. Not moving, just sitting there, watching. 15 minutes passed, then 30. The truck never moved. The figure never got out. Finally, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, my breath fogging in the cold air. The moment I did, the truck's cab light turned off. The engine stopped. I hesitated, staring at the now dark vehicle, the silence almost deafening. "Hey," I called out. "We're closed outside. You need something?" No answer. I walked closer, crunching over the gravel, and shined my flashlight into the cab. Empty. No driver. No sign of anyone at all. When I turned back toward the store, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The front door was open. I knew I had locked it behind me. Inside, the lights were flickering. I ran back in, heart hammering. The store looked exactly the same, except for the phone. It was off the hook, swinging slightly as if someone had just put it down. I picked it up again, hand trembling. Nothing. Just that same breathing. "What do you want?" I whispered. Then came the voice. Deep, guttural, and wrong, like it was echoing through a hollow tunnel. "Don't look behind you." My stomach dropped. I didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe, but every instinct screamed at me to turn. Slowly, I did. There, standing just outside the window, was a figure. Tall, pale, its face pressed against the glass, expressionless except for a grin that stretched too wide. I dropped the phone. It didn't move, just kept watching me, head tilted slightly to one side. I backed away, fumbling for the counter. The lights flickered again, and when they came back, the figure was gone. The next few hours passed like a blur. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of the lights, felt wrong. I tried calling my manager, then the police, but every time I picked up the phone, all I got was static. The clock on the wall had stopped at 2:17 a.m. At one point, I heard footsteps in the back storage room. Slow, deliberate. I called out, "Hello? You're not supposed to be back there." No answer. The door creaked open, just a few inches, and I swear I saw a shadow move across the floor. When I went to check, the room was empty. But the smell, that burnt hair smell from earlier, was stronger now, chokingly thick. I could barely breathe. Then, as I turned to leave, I saw something scrawled across the inside of the door in what looked like grease or oil. "Don't leave!" I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a crate. My flashlight flickered, then died. The store went completely dark except for the faint red glow of the coffee machine. That's when I heard the whisper again, right next to my ear this time. "You shouldn't have looked." I bolted out of the back room and into the main area. The windows were fogged from the inside now, like someone had been breathing heavily against them. I could see handprints, dozens of them, pressed into the glass. I didn't wait. I ran to the front door and shoved it open, the cold air slamming into me. The parking lot was empty again. No truck, no headlights, just the dark stretch of highway disappearing into nothing. I didn't stop running until I hit the diner a quarter-mile down the road. The waitress inside looked at me like I was crazy, sweat-soaked, shaking, rambling about someone watching me at the gas station. She called the sheriff, who drove back with me just before dawn. The store was quiet, too quiet. Everything looked untouched, like nothing had happened. The security footage showed nothing but me walking around, talking to myself, staring out the window at an empty parking lot. No truck, no figure, nothing. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The sheriff tried to calm me down, said night shifts mess with people's heads, sleep deprivation, isolation. But I can still hear that voice in my head sometimes, especially when I drive past that stretch of road at night. A few weeks later, I got a call from one of the daytime clerks. They'd had a new driver stop in, a man in his 50s, gray hair, trucker cap. He mentioned that he used to stop there every night until a few years ago when he saw something wrong by the pumps. Said he never came back after that. When the clerk pressed him, he said he'd seen a man standing in the doorway of the store, smiling too wide, not moving an inch for hours. No one works the night shift there anymore. The store closes at midnight now. People say the owner lost too much money keeping it open. But I've heard other things. Truckers passing through talk about seeing a figure on the side of the highway, standing under the flickering light near the station, watching as they pass. I moved 3 towns over, got a day job, but the nightmares never stopped. Sometimes I wake up to the sound of static from my phone. Once, when I finally answered, all I heard was that same breathing, slow and deliberate, and a voice whispering, "Don't look outside." I don't know if whatever I saw that night was real, or if it was something that latched on to me, waiting for darkness. But every time I pass a gas station after midnight, I can't help but glance at the windows, because sometimes, if you look close enough, you can see a pale face staring back, smiling that same impossible smile, just waiting for someone else to look. Story the end. It was a freezing night in February when I took an extra shift at a small gas station on the outskirts of Reno, Nevada. I'd been working there part-time for a few months just to cover bills while finishing a medical tech certification, and I didn't mind the solitude. The night shift was slow, occasional truckers, maybe a few locals buying cigarettes or coffee. The pay wasn't great, but it was quiet, and I liked that. The station sat at the edge of the desert, right where the highway curved out of town. There were no other buildings for miles in either direction, just open, endless dark and the sound of wind sweeping across the sand. The neon sign out front buzzed constantly, flickering from time to time like it was struggling to stay alive. That night, my coworker Jeff called in sick, leaving me alone. It was just me, the cold hum of the fluorescent lights, and the dull whine of the freezer in the back. By 11:45 p.m., the traffic on the highway had slowed to nothing. I sat behind the counter, scrolling through my phone, occasionally glancing up at the empty parking lot, illuminated by two flickering light poles. The security camera monitor sat above the register, showing four grainy black and white feeds inside the store, the front door, the pumps, and the dumpster area in the back. Around midnight, I saw headlights coming down the highway. A white pickup truck pulled into the lot and parked near Pump 3. The engine stayed running for a while, but no one got out. I waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Finally, I stepped around the counter and looked out the glass doors. The truck was still there, idling quietly, exhaust drifting like fog. I couldn't make out the driver through the tinted windows. I picked up the phone, ready to call out to them through the loudspeaker, but before I could, the truck shut off. The headlights went dark. Still, no one got out. That's when the wind died. Completely. The neon sign went silent, and for a moment, the entire world felt like it had stopped breathing. Then the automatic doors slid open behind me. The sensor beeped, but I hadn't seen anyone approach. I turned around quickly, expecting to see a customer, but the store was empty. The only sound was the faint hum of the freezer again. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. The doors closed slowly, hissing shut. I stared at the cameras. The one aimed at the entrance showed the doors opening, but there was no figure on the footage, just the doors moving by themselves. A chill ran down my spine. I told myself it was probably a glitch. Those sensors were old, and the wind sometimes messed with them. I checked the front again. Still no one. The truck's driver's side door remained shut. Then, faintly, from the back storage area, I heard something fall. A loud metallic clang. I walked down the narrow aisle between the coolers, my shoes squeaking on the tile. "Jeff, if you're screwing with me, I swear to God," I said under my breath. Nah. No answer. I pushed the door to the storage room open. The air back there was colder than the rest of the store. One of the shelves had toppled slightly, a few soda cans rolling on the floor, but what made my stomach turn was the footprint on the concrete, wet, dark, and bare. Someone had been back there. I crouched down to look closer. The footprint wasn't small. It was large, wide, and oddly long, like whoever made it had unusually stretched toes. The water glistened faintly in the fluorescent light. When I looked up, the back door, a heavy steel security door that led out to the dumpster, was cracked open. It should have been locked. I grabbed my flashlight from the counter and walked over slowly. The desert wind had picked up again, whistling through the gap. I leaned forward to peer outside. The dumpster sat under a buzzing yellow light, casting deep shadows on the sand. And then I saw them. More footprints. Bare ones, trailing away from the door toward the darkness behind the dumpsters. Every instinct screamed for me to shut the door, but something pulled at my curiosity. I stepped outside, flashlight trembling in my hand. The cold hit me immediately, sharp and dry. I followed the prints, each one pressed clearly into the sand, glistening as though wet, even though there hadn't been rain in weeks. They led around the back corner of the lot toward the edge of the desert. Then they just stopped, mid-step, like whoever made them had vanished. I swept my flashlight across the desert, nothing but sagebrush and miles of darkness. The air felt heavier than before, thick and almost electric. I backed away, my heart pounding. That's when I heard it, the faint creak of the door behind me. I spun around just in time to see the steel door closing on its own. I ran and shoved my hand between it and the frame, forcing it open. The hinges groaned, and I stumbled inside, slamming the bolt shut behind me. My chest heaved as I tried to calm myself. When I turned to look toward the store, every light had gone out. The hum of the freezers, the buzz of the ceiling lamps, everything was silent. I stood there in the pitch dark for maybe 10 seconds before the emergency lights kicked in, bathing the aisles in a faint red glow. The sound of the freezer motor sputtered weakly back to life. That's when the motion sensor above aisle 3 beeped. Then aisle 4. Then aisle 1. I stared toward the front of the store. Something was moving. Something I couldn't see, triggering the sensors as it passed by. The doors opened again, that same hiss. The red glow stretched across the counter, and I swear I saw a shape move through it. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dripping. The sound was unmistakable. Wet footsteps on tile. My body locked up. I crouched behind the counter, breathing shallowly, staring at the security feed. On the screen, I could see movement. A dark figure was standing between aisles 2 and 3. No features, no face, just a shape darker than the shadows. It tilted its head slowly, as if listening. Then it stepped forward again, that sickening squelch echoing through the store. I fumbled for the phone, but the line was dead. The thing moved closer, passing directly in front of the camera. For a split second, I saw its reflection in the cooler glass, tall, impossibly thin, with long arms that brushed against the shelves. Its head turned toward the camera, but there was nothing there, just smooth black emptiness where a face should have been. The automatic doors opened again, though I hadn't seen it reach them. The cold wind swept in, and then silence. I stayed crouched behind the counter for several minutes, heart pounding, afraid to move. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight and edged toward the front. The doors were open, swinging gently. The truck was still parked by pump 3, engine off, windows black. Something inside me said not to look, but I did anyway. The driver's window was rolled halfway down. Inside the cab, 2 pale hands rested on the steering wheel. The driver's head was tilted back, mouth open, but his eyes were gone. Just dark, hollow sockets staring upward. I stumbled back, nearly falling. My flashlight flickered, then died completely. The neon sign outside started buzzing again, faintly at first, then louder, like it was trying to come back to life. When the headlights of a passing car finally swept across the lot, I sprinted outside, waving it down. A trucker pulled over, and I babbled something about a man in the car, someone dead, something in the store. He radioed for help immediately. The police arrived within 15 minutes. They found me sitting on the curb, shaking. When they went inside, the store was completely normal. The lights worked fine. No puddles, no footprints. The cameras showed nothing unusual. The man in the truck had suffered what looked like a massive heart attack, they said. No sign of struggle, no wounds. But when I later asked if they'd checked for fingerprints on the truck's door handles, one of the officers gave me a strange look. There were, he said, but not human ones. I quit the next morning. A few months later, another night clerk went missing during his shift. They found his car still running by the pumps, but he was gone. People in town say the station's cursed, that years ago, before it was built, a man disappeared in that same stretch of desert. Some say he shows up when it's cold, dripping wet from nowhere, walking barefoot through the sand, looking for a ride home. I don't know what I saw that night, but sometimes when I drive that stretch of highway, I still see that old neon sign buzzing in the distance, and I swear there's always a white pickup parked under it. Engine running. Lights off. Story the end. It was late October, the kind of night that sits heavy in your chest, quiet, cold, and unnervingly still. I'd been working security at the Redwood Industrial Complex for about 6 months. The place used to be a textile plant back in the 70s before it was converted into a warehouse hub for different shipping companies. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. alone, just me and the sound of the wind rattling through the loading docks. The building was massive, 4 connected wings, endless rows of shelving, and an upper level with old catwalks that nobody used anymore. At night, with only the emergency lights glowing red along the walls, it felt like being inside the ribs of some dead giant. Most nights were dull. I'd walk the perimeter every hour, check the cameras, then kill time scrolling through my phone. But one night, November 2nd, 2019, things got weird. Around 12:30 a.m., I was doing my rounds in the West Wing when I noticed one of the overhead lights flickering. Nothing unusual. Half the place was ancient. But as I got closer, I realized I could hear something faint. It wasn't the hum of the light or the rattle of the vent. It was humming, like a woman's voice. Soft, off-key, coming from somewhere down aisle 16. At first, I thought maybe one of the night staff from the cleaning service had come in early. But when I radioed dispatch, they said no cleaners were scheduled until 5 a.m. I followed the sound, flashlight beam cutting through the dusty air. The humming stopped when I turned the corner. The aisle was empty, just pallets of boxed merchandise and a few old racks. Then, out of nowhere, something clanged above me. I shined my light up toward the catwalk. The metal walkway was about 20 feet overhead, covered in shadows. I couldn't see anyone, but I swear I heard the faint sound of footsteps moving away. "Hey!" I called out, trying to sound firm even though my voice cracked a little. "You're not supposed to be up there." No response. I made my way to the stairwell that led to the catwalk. The door was locked, as it always was, but when I tried the handle, it clicked open. Someone had unlocked it from the inside. As soon as I stepped onto the stairs, that cold warehouse air seemed to turn colder. My breath fogged out in front of me. The only light came from my flashlight and the faint red glow of an exit sign at the far end. When I reached the top, I swept the beam across the walkway. Nothing. Just the echo of my boots on the metal grating. Then, something moved in the corner of my eye. A shape, crouched behind a stack of old crates. I turned the light toward it, but the second the beam hit, it was gone. I stood there for a good minute, heart hammering, trying to tell myself it was my imagination. When I finally headed back down, I found something wedged in the stairwell railing. A scrap of old fabric, faded blue with a patch of what looked like dried blood. It smelled faintly of mildew and something sweet, almost floral, like old perfume. I bagged it up, figuring I'd file a report in the morning, and went back to the office to check the cameras. Here's where things got strange. The footage from the West Wing showed me walking down aisle 16, flashlight in hand. Then, in the far corner of the screen, just before I turned the corner, you could clearly see a figure standing in the shadows. A woman, wearing what looked like a white dress, head tilted, long dark hair hanging loose. The second my flashlight swept that way, she vanished from the frame. My skin went cold watching it. I replayed the clip 5 times, zoomed in as much as I could. Every time, the same thing. The figure appears, stands still for a moment, and then just fades out. I printed a screenshot, left it on my desk, and kept the footage running while I took another look around. By 2:15, things were quiet again, too quiet. Even the hum of the lights seemed softer. I was sipping coffee, half dozing, when the radio on my desk suddenly crackled to life. "Come in." The voice was faint, female, distorted by static. I picked it up. "Redwood Security. Identify yourself." Nothing for a moment. Then, clear as day. "Come up here." I froze. "Who is this?" The reply came slower this time. "You saw me." I slammed the radio down. My heart was racing so hard I thought I might pass out. I checked the CCTV feeds again, and every single camera in the West Wing had gone black. I grabbed my flashlight and headed that way because part of me, stupidly, thought maybe someone was messing with me. But when I reached aisle 16 again, all the lights were out. Every bulb. It was completely dark except for the beam of my flashlight. I could hear that humming again. Soft, off-key, coming from above. I pointed the light upward, and there she was, standing on the catwalk, looking down at me. She wasn't solid, not completely. Her face was pale, eyes dark, almost hollow-looking. Her dress wasn't white like in the footage. It was gray, old, tattered, soaked in places. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. She tilted her head to the side, and I heard her whisper, not through my ears, but inside my head, "You shouldn't have come back." The next thing I knew, the lights flickered back on and she was gone. I didn't remember getting back to the office, but I found myself there, shaking, my flashlight still on. The clock read 2:47. I must have lost 20 minutes. When I looked at the security feed again, something new had appeared on the footage, writing on the camera lens itself as if smeared with dust or grease. 2 words, "Help me." That was enough. I called my supervisor and told him I was leaving early. He didn't argue, but when I came back the next night, the footage from that hour had been completely erased. The IT guy swore no one had touched it. A week later, I was having lunch with one of the daytime guards, an older guy named Ken. I told him about the figure, the humming, the camera glitch. He looked uneasy, then leaned forward and said, "You ever hear about the fire?" I shook my head. He told me that back in 1984, when the building was still a textile factory, a worker had died up on the catwalk in the West Wing, a woman named Claire Bowman. There'd been a small fire in the storage area, and she got trapped when a beam collapsed. The sprinkler system failed, and by the time firefighters found her, she'd suffocated in the smoke. They said she was humming when they pulled her out. The song was the same one her coworkers said she used to sing during her shifts, an old lullaby her grandmother taught her. That part hit me hard because the humming I heard matched that exact description. Ken said every few years, night workers report seeing her, usually when they're alone. Sometimes they hear her singing. Sometimes she asks for help. Sometimes she just watches. I told him about the scrap of fabric I'd found, and he just nodded slowly. Her uniform was blue. After that conversation, I started bringing my own flashlight with a strobe mode, just in case. But for the next few weeks, nothing strange happened. I almost convinced myself it was all stress and imagination. Then, one night around 3 a.m., the fire alarm went off. I jumped up and checked the control panel, Zone 4, West Wing. I grabbed my keys and sprinted down the corridor. The air smelled faintly of smoke. When I turned the corner toward aisle 16, the sprinklers came on, only in that section. Water rained down on empty shelves. There was no fire. And there she was again, standing on the catwalk, soaked, staring down at me through the mist. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. The lights flickered once, twice, then the power went out entirely. I was plunged into total darkness except for the blinking red of the exit sign. I could hear her humming again. Closer now. I turned and ran, slipping on the wet floor, water splashing around my boots. When I reached the stairwell, I looked back once and saw her standing halfway down the aisle, head tilted, still humming, eyes locked on mine. When the power came back, she was gone. The fire department showed up 20 minutes later, but there was no trace of smoke or heat. They marked it as a false alarm. The next morning, the maintenance crew found something in the drainage system, a thin strip of charred fabric, dark blue, with an old metal name tag still attached. The engraving was barely legible, but you could make out the first name, Claire. I turned in my notice that afternoon. It's been years since that night, but sometimes if I pass by the old redwood building, I swear I can still see a faint light flickering in the west wing, like someone's flashlight moving along the catwalk. And if the night is still enough, I can almost hear that soft humming drifting through the wind. Off-key, sad, and endless. People say ghosts linger because they're trapped. I think some linger because they're waiting. And I think she's still waiting for someone to finally help her find a way out. Story the end. It was late November, one of those cold Midwest nights where the sky looks bruised and the air feels dead. I was a security guard at a distribution warehouse on the outskirts of Indianapolis. The place was huge. Rows upon rows of stacked crates, forklifts parked like sleeping beasts, and a constant hum from the refrigeration units in the back. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m., and most nights the only sound I'd hear was the echo of my own footsteps. I had been working there for almost a year. The night shift was quiet, easy money, though it got lonely. Sometimes the silence played tricks on me, especially around 3 a.m., when exhaustion and isolation made every shadow look alive. But I'd gotten used to it. That is, until the night when everything changed. It was around 1:15 a.m. when I first noticed something off. I was doing my usual patrol along the north loading docks, clipboard in hand, when I heard the alarm tone for Dock 12 beep faintly through the static of the intercom system. It wasn't loud, just a short, clipped sound, like someone had manually triggered it and then turned it off. I radioed the other guard, Tom, who was stationed in the front office. "Hey, you getting anything on Dock 12? He came back a few seconds later, his voice crackling with static. "Negative. All quiet up here." I frowned and double-checked the security monitor next to the dock. The feed was grainy, but clear enough to make out the loading area. It was empty. The massive metal doors were closed, the lights flickering slightly from age. I started to move on, chalking it up to a system glitch, when I noticed something odd. In the corner of the frame, near one of the crates, was a dark figure, tall, standing perfectly still. I squinted. It looked like someone in a black hoodie, just watching. I turned to glance through the small window in the dock door, but the space beyond was empty. When I looked back at the monitor, the figure was gone. My heart started pounding, a tightness crawling up my throat. I told myself it had to be a shadow, a trick of the camera angle. I took a deep breath, grabbed my flashlight, and decided to check it out anyway. The air inside the loading bay was freezing, colder than it should have been. My breath fogged in front of me as I swept the beam of my flashlight across the crates. Everything looked normal, except the air felt wrong. Heavy. like the silence itself was pressing down on me. I reached the far end of the dock, near where I thought I'd seen the figure. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. On the concrete floor, barely visible, were footprints, bare feet smeared slightly as though the person had been walking through water. The prints led toward the maintenance hallway. I should have called Tom. I should have gone back, but something in me wanted to prove it was nothing, to myself, to the creeping dread clawing at my chest. I followed the prints. The maintenance hallway was dimly lit, the overhead bulbs buzzing faintly. The smell hit me halfway down the corridor, damp and metallic, like rust mixed with something sweet and rotten. My stomach turned. Then I heard it. A dragging sound, slow and deliberate, echoing from somewhere ahead. It wasn't a person walking, it was something being pulled across the floor. I froze, every muscle in my body tight. The dragging stopped, then started again, closer this time. "Tom?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. I turned a corner, flashlight trembling in my hand, and nearly screamed. A door at the end of the hall, maintenance room 3, was open just a crack, and through that narrow slit I saw an eye staring back at me. Not blinking, just staring. I stumbled backward, my flashlight clattering to the ground. By the time I picked it up and shined the beam back on the door, it was wide open. The room inside was empty, but the air was freezing. My breath came out in quick, visible bursts, and on the far wall, scrawled in something dark, were the words, "Stay after shift." I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the security office. Tom looked up from his monitor, startled. "Jesus, you look like you've seen a ghost." "There's someone back there," I panted, "in the maintenance hall. We need to call the cops." He frowned. "The maintenance hall? That section's closed off. They've been renovating it for weeks. There's no power back there." I stared at him. "What are you talking about? I just came from there. The lights were on." He shook his head. "No way. That whole section's been dark since last Friday. Power issue." We both stared at the monitors. Dock 12's feed was still flickering slightly. Then, right there on the screen, the same figure appeared again, standing by the dock door, facing the camera. Tom cursed and grabbed the phone to call the police. I leaned closer to the monitor. The figure started moving, slow and jerky, like it was walking underwater. It turned, looked directly into the camera, and I swear I saw its mouth move, like it was whispering something. Then the screen went black. The cops came about 30 minutes later. They searched the entire warehouse. Nothing. No sign of anyone. No footprints, no writing on the wall, nothing. They told us it was probably a prank. Someone broke in, messed with the cameras, and slipped out. But that didn't explain the freezing air. It didn't explain the dragging sound. And it sure as hell didn't explain what happened next. The next night, Tom didn't show up for his shift. When I called his phone, it went straight to voicemail. Mac, the supervisor, said he'd probably overslept, but by the next morning, he still hadn't answered. They found his car parked right outside the gate. The inside was covered in condensation, like someone had been breathing heavily in it for hours. On the dashboard, written in the fogged glass, were 3 words, "Stay after shift." A week later, the company brought in new security staff. I quit before they could assign me another night alone. I thought that would be the end of it, but sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I still hear that dragging sound in my head. Slow, wet, relentless. I moved to a new town, got a new job, swore off night shifts forever. But the fear never left. I still wake up drenched in sweat, thinking I see a figure in the corner of my room, standing perfectly still, watching. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the dark window and swear it isn't me staring back. I tried to find out more about the warehouse. Turns out, 20 years ago, before it was a distribution center, it used to be part of a meatpacking plant. There had been an accident. One of the workers got caught in the freezing unit overnight. They didn't find him until morning. Some say he never really left. I tell myself it's just stories, just night shift paranoia. But every time I close my eyes, I see that dark figure standing under the flickering lights by Dock 12, whispering the same 3 words over and over. Stay after shift, story the end. It was around 10:45 p.m. when I pulled into the parking lot behind the small hospital where I worked. The night air had that hollow quiet that only comes when most of the city is asleep. The sodium lights buzzed softly, flickering in orange pools across the cracked asphalt. I sat in my car for a minute, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, and tried to summon the motivation to start another 12-hour shift. I'd been working nights for nearly 5 years, but that evening felt different the moment I stepped out of the car. The air had a heaviness to it, something almost electric, and the sound of the generator by the back-loading dock seemed louder than usual. I was a respiratory therapist at a mid-sized hospital in Ohio. Night shifts were usually quiet, a few emergencies, some paperwork, long stretches of boredom. The skeleton crew that worked nights became close out of necessity. There was Jessica, the charge nurse who'd worked there since the 90s, Marcus from security who spent most of the night watching the camera feeds, and Dr. Collins, a soft-spoken ER doc who kept to himself but always had this haunted look in his eyes. That night started like any other. I signed in, went through rounds, and checked the ventilators in the ICU. Everything was calm until around 1 a.m. when the lights flickered. Not off completely, just a quick dimming. Enough for everyone to notice. The generator outside kicked harder than usual. The nurses at the station exchanged glances, but we shrugged it off. Hospitals have backup power systems for a reason. About 30 minutes later, Jessica called me down to room 312. The patient, an older man with COPD, was agitated and pulling at his oxygen mask. I went in, calmed him down, and adjusted the flow. As I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. The light above his bed was flickering rhythmically, almost like Morse code. It wasn't random. There was a pulse to it. I remember joking, "Maybe your roommate's trying to communicate with us." And the old man didn't laugh. He just stared at me, eyes wide, and said in a cracked whisper, "It's not the power doing that." That stuck with me as I left the room. The flickering followed me down the hallway, one bulb after another dimming as I passed under them, then flaring back to life. By the time I reached the nurse's station, Jessica was already on the phone with maintenance. She said Carl, the night maintenance guy, wasn't answering his radio or phone. Marcus from security stopped by a few minutes later, saying Carl's truck was still in the lot, but he wasn't anywhere in the building, according to the cameras. "Probably hiding in the basement smoking again," Jessica said, rolling her eyes. But Marcus didn't seem convinced. He said the basement cameras had been glitching out, static, black screens, or random bursts of light that didn't make sense. At around 2:15 a.m., an alarm went off in the ICU. I rushed in thinking it was a vent alarm, but all the machines were fine. The sound wasn't coming from the patient's equipment. It was the emergency code alarm, the one used when a patient flatlines. But no one had coded. The nurses checked every monitor, every patient. Nothing. It was like the hospital itself was triggering an emergency that didn't exist. The intercom crackled then, and we all froze. Usually, you'd hear the operator's voice announce code blue or paging Dr. So-and-so. But this time it was just breathing. Slow, wet breathing that hissed through the speakers for about 5 seconds before cutting out, then silence. Jessica grabbed the phone to call the operator's desk, but there was no dial tone. None of the phones had one. The hospital's internal system had gone dead. That was when Marcus ran back in, white-faced and shaking. "You guys need to see this," he said. He led us to the security room near the ER. The wall of monitors showed live feeds from every hallway, every floor, except the basement ones. They were still glitching. But what made my stomach turn was what we saw on the West Wing camera. A figure. At first glance, it looked like Carl, same blue coveralls, same build. But he was standing in the middle of the hallway, completely still. The hallway lights around him were off, but his figure was visible like he was being faintly backlit from somewhere. Marcus zoomed in. The figure's face was wrong. It wasn't Carl. The mouth looked stretched, unnaturally wide, and the head tilted at an angle no human neck could manage. Jessica gasped, "What the hell is that?" Then the figure started moving. Slow, deliberate steps toward the camera. But every few frames, it would jerk, skipping closer too quickly, like bad video compression. 1 second, it was 20 feet away. The next, it filled the screen, its face blurred, but somehow sharp enough to see dark, sunken eyes. Then, the screen went black. Marcus tried switching feeds, but one by one, the monitors started going out, showing only static. We could still hear the generator outside humming, but the hum had taken on this low, oscillating tone, almost like it was resonating through the floor. Dr. Collins walked in just as we were trying to contact the power company on our cell phones, which, of course, had no service. He said the ER's motion sensor doors kept opening on their own, even when no one was near them. The motion lights would click on, the doors slide open, but nothing would be there. The air in the building had gotten heavy by then, hot and still, even though the AC was running. It felt like being underwater. Jessica decided we should all stay near the nurses' station until things stabilized. Then, around 3 a.m., the lights went completely out. Emergency red backup lights kicked in, washing the corridors in dim crimson. I could hear something moving in the hall beyond the station. A dragging sound, slow and uneven, like someone pulling a bag across tile. Marcus drew his flashlight, sweeping it across the hallway. The beam caught something wet smeared along the wall, a streak of dark red that glistened in the emergency lights. We followed it cautiously. It led toward the elevator. The doors were partly open, stuck mid-close, and inside, on the floor, was Carl's maintenance radio, covered in blood. Jessica screamed when we saw it. Dr. Collins tried calling down to the basement from his portable radio, but only static came through. Marcus pried the elevator doors open the rest of the way and shined his light down the shaft. The car was stuck between floors, motionless, and below it, about 15 feet down, something was moving. I only saw it for a second, a flash of blue coveralls and something pale dragging itself in the dark before it disappeared into the shadows. We backed away fast. Marcus slammed the elevator door shut and said, "We're staying upstairs." Over the next hour, strange things started happening across the hospital. Call lights from empty rooms began blinking in patterns, doors opened on their own, and the smell, that metallic, sweet smell of blood, filled the air even though no one was hurt. We could hear whispers, faint but real, echoing from the vents above us. At 4 a.m., we heard the generator outside shut off. The entire building went completely black, except for our flashlights. And then, from somewhere below us, a scream. It wasn't human. It was too loud, too distorted, like multiple voices screaming together. The floor beneath us vibrated. Marcus said, "We need to get out now," and started leading us toward the loading dock exit. But as we passed the ICU hallway, the lights suddenly flickered back to life. Every monitor, every vent alarm went off at once. All the patient's machines started showing erratic readings. Heart rate spiking, oxygen dropping, blood pressure alarms wailing. I ran into room 312. The old man from earlier was sitting upright in his bed, staring at the ceiling. His oxygen mask was off, and his lips were blue. I grabbed his chart to check his vitals, but when I looked back, he was smiling. Not weakly, not deliriously, smiling in a wide, unnatural grin. He whispered, "It came for him first, it's coming back for the rest." Then his eyes rolled back and he flatlined. I tried to start compressions, yelling for Jessica, but my hands froze when I saw movement in the hallway through the window, that same figure from the cameras. It was crawling on the floor now, limbs twisting wrong, its head snapping toward me as if it knew I was watching. I stumbled back, knocking over a tray. The hallway lights blew out one by one as it moved closer. Marcus burst into the room, pulled me out, and we ran for the stairs. The others followed, but when we reached the stairwell door, we stopped cold. Because Carl was standing there, only it wasn't him anymore. His skin looked gray, stretched thin, his eyes were completely black, and when he opened his mouth, it wasn't words that came out. It was that same static sound we'd heard through the intercom. Marcus swung his flashlight at him, and it passed right through as if he were made of smoke. Carl lunged forward, and the stairwell door slammed shut between us on its own. We ran the other way toward the ER exit. The automatic doors opened, but outside was nothing. Not darkness, not the parking lot. Nothing. Just this blinding white void that hummed like an electrical current. Jessica stopped, staring, whispering, "That's not outside." Dr. Collins pulled her back just as the void seemed to ripple, and the ER doors slammed shut again. Every alarm in the hospital went off simultaneously, and the overhead intercom blared a single distorted word, "Stay." That's when Marcus finally lost it. He pulled his sidearm, security kept a weapon on site, and fired at the ceiling lights, screaming, "What do you want from us?" The sound echoed unnaturally, like it didn't end. The shots just stretched into a drone, filling the hall until I thought my head would split. And then suddenly, everything stopped. The lights went back to normal. The generator kicked back on. The hospital looked exactly as it had before. It was 6:01 a.m. We all stood there in silence for a long time, shaking. Jessica called for maintenance and police backup, but when they searched the building, there was no sign of Carl. His blood was gone, the radio cleaned. The cameras showed normal footage all night long, no glitches, no figure. Just us, panicked, running through hallways that looked completely empty. They said the power never even went out. I quit the next day. Marcus did too. Jessica transferred to a daytime shift at another hospital. Dr. Collins, he didn't last much longer. He was found dead in his home 6 months later. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. But the coroner's report mentioned something strange. His expression. He'd been smiling, wide and unnatural, just like that old man in room 312. Sometimes I drive past the hospital at night and I swear I still see that flickering light on the third floor, pulsing in the same rhythm as before. And sometimes when I can't sleep, I swear I hear the generator hum in my head, that same low vibration, followed by the faint whisper of a voice through the dark, saying softly, "Stay." Story the end. It was late September of 2019 when I started working the night shift at a long-term care facility in rural Pennsylvania. The place was called Pine Hollow Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, though everyone in town just called it Pine Hollow. It sat on the edge of a wooded area, far from the main road, and it always looked a little too dark no matter how many lights were on. The first time I drove there for my 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, I remember thinking that it didn't look like a nursing home at all. It looked like an old boarding school that had been repurposed decades ago. The building was huge, made of old brick that had turned black with time, and the narrow windows were covered with heavy blinds that never seemed to be open. My role was as a CNA, or Certified Nursing Assistant, responsible for helping residents with their basic needs. I'd worked nights before, but never in a facility that felt quite like that one. There were 4 of us working the floor that night, me, another CNA named Jamie, a nurse named Lila, and the supervisor, Robert, who spent most of his time in his office. Jamie was a little older, probably in her 40s, and had been there for years. She was friendly but quiet, and when I told her it was my first night, she gave me this look that I couldn't quite read. "Don't worry," she said with a small smile. "You'll get used to it. Nights are slow here, most of the time." The way she said that last part stuck with me. We started our rounds around midnight. The place was divided into 3 wings, east, west, and south. I was assigned to east with Jamie, which was mostly for residents who were semi-independent, people who could get around a little but needed supervision. The halls were dimly lit with flickering fluorescent bulbs that made the place feel more like a hospital from the 1950s than a modern care facility. Most of the residents were asleep. You could hear the rhythmic hiss of oxygen machines and the faint hum of old ceiling fans. Everything about Pine Hollow felt dated, like time had stopped there 30 years ago. Around 2 a.m., Jamie suggested we take our break. We went to the break room down the hall and poured ourselves coffee. That's when I decided to ask her what she meant earlier, about nights not always being slow. She hesitated before answering. "Have you ever worked in an old place before?" she asked. I told her yes, a few hospitals and 1 nursing home that had been around since the 70s. "Then you probably know what I mean," she said. "Places like this, they hold things. People die here all the time. You get used to it, but sometimes it doesn't stay quiet after they go." I laughed it off, assuming she was trying to scare the new guy. But her face didn't change. She just stirred her coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the table. "You'll hear things," she said. "You'll think someone's calling for you, or you'll hear doors open when no one's there. Just don't go looking unless you have to." Before I could ask more, Lila poked her head in to tell us one of the residents, Mr. Hanley, had pressed his call light. We both got up, thankful for the distraction. Mr. Hanley was in room 112 near the end of the east wing. He was 89, a small, frail man with severe dementia. He was awake when we got there, staring toward the dark corner of his room. His call light was still blinking above the door. "What's wrong, Mr. Hanley?" Jamie asked softly. He didn't answer at first. His eyes were wide and glassy. Then he whispered, "She's standing there again." Jamie glanced at me, and I felt a chill creep up my neck. "Who's standing there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "The one in white," he said. "She keeps coming in and out of the wall." Jamie turned on the bedside lamp, flooding the room with yellow light. There was no one there, of course, just the old dresser, his IV stand, and a wall of faded wallpaper. Jamie patted his shoulder. "You're just dreaming, Mr. Hanley. Go back to sleep, okay?" He nodded weakly, but didn't take his eyes off that corner. When we left the room, Jamie exhaled slowly. "He's been talking about her for weeks," she said. "The woman in white. Claims she watches him from the corner." "Could be dementia," I said, trying to sound logical. "Yeah," Jamie said. "That's what I tell myself." We finished our rounds, and by 3 a.m. the halls were silent again. I was sitting at the nurse's station, entering notes into the computer, when I heard it. Something that made my heart skip. It sounded like someone humming. Soft, tuneless, but distinctly human. It was coming from down the hallway toward room 112. At first, I thought it might be Jamie, but when I looked up, she was sitting across from me, flipping through charts. "Do you hear that?" I asked. She paused, listening. The humming stopped. "Don't," she said quietly. "Just don't go down there." Her tone was dead serious, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and started down the hall. The floor creaked beneath my shoes and the lights buzzed overhead. When I reached the door to 112, I hesitated before knocking lightly. "Mr. Hanley?" I called. No answer. I opened the door slowly. The room was dark except for the dim light from the oxygen machine. Mr. Hanley was asleep now, breathing heavily. I stepped inside, shining my flashlight around the room. Nothing. But then, as I turned toward the door, I saw it, just for a second. A figure reflected in the small glass window of the door. A woman, thin and pale, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned white gown. She was standing just behind me. I spun around, the light jerking across the walls. There was no one there. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. I rushed out of the room and practically jogged back to the nurse's station. Jamie looked up immediately. "See something?" she asked. I didn't answer at first. Then I said, "There was someone behind me. I saw her reflection in the window." Jamie didn't look surprised. She just nodded slowly. "She's been seen before," she said. "People say she was a patient here when it used to be a sanatorium. They treated tuberculosis here back in the 40s before it became a nursing home." I didn't want to believe her, but the fear in her eyes was real. Around 4 a.m., we got another call light, room 118 this time. When Jamie and I went to check, we found the call light blinking, but the room empty. The resident there, a woman named Dorothy, had passed away 2 weeks before. The room hadn't been reassigned yet. Jamie turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment. "It always happens after someone dies," she said quietly. "It's like she's checking to see who's next." I barely slept the next day. When I came back that night, I tried to shake off the unease. The second shift was almost identical to the first, quiet, routine, until around 2:30 a.m. when the power went out. It wasn't uncommon for Pine Hollow to lose power during storms, but that night the sky was clear. The lights flickered once, then died, plunging the hallway into near darkness. Only the red glow of emergency lights illuminated the corridors. Lila radioed to say the generator should kick in any second. It didn't. Jamie and I grabbed flashlights and started checking on residents. Most were asleep, but a few had woken up, confused and calling out. As I entered room 112, I noticed the air felt noticeably colder. My breath came out in visible puffs, and the smell in the room, musty and metallic, made me gag. Mr. Hanley was sitting upright in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the same corner. "She's here," he whispered. "She says I'm next." I turned my flashlight toward the corner. For just an instant, I saw the same pale shape. Her head tilted slightly, eyes dark hollows, face blank. The flashlight flickered, and when it came back on, she was gone. I backed out of the room, nearly tripping over the threshold. My chest felt tight, like the air had been sucked out of me. Jamie came running down the hall when she heard me. "You saw her again?" she asked. I just nodded. "Come on," she said. "Let's check the breaker." We made our way down to the maintenance room, which was in the basement. It took both of us a few tries to find the right key. The basement was colder than upstairs, with long pipes running along the ceiling and puddles of condensation dripping onto the floor. When we reached the breaker panel, Jamie froze. The switch for the east wing had been flipped off, manually. She turned to me. No one's supposed to come down here at night. Maintenance locks it after 6. She flipped it back on, and the lights upstairs flickered to life. When we returned to the floor, everything looked normal again. The humming had stopped. But as we passed room 112, I noticed Mr. Hanley's call light blinking again. We went in together. He was gone. No sign of struggle, no sound of movement. Just an empty bed and the faint smell of antiseptic. Jamie checked the restroom and closet. Nothing. We called a code gray for a missing patient, and the staff spent nearly an hour searching every hallway, every room, even outside. They found him around 5:30 a.m. at the end of the south wing, an area sealed off for renovations. He was lying on the floor, his hospital gown torn, eyes open, mouth twisted in what looked like terror. The coroner later said it was heart failure, but I never believed that. Not after what I saw. I quit Pine Hollow 2 weeks later. I couldn't handle it anymore. The noises, the shadows, the constant feeling that someone was watching me. But before I left, Jamie told me something that still keeps me awake some nights. She only shows herself to people who are new, she said quietly. It's like she's testing you, seeing if you'll notice her. I moved states, took a job at a hospital in Indiana, and tried to forget about Pine Hollow. But sometimes when I'm working a night shift alone, I'll catch something in the corner of my eye. A flicker of white in the reflection of a window, a soft humming from down the hall. And every time I turn around, there's nothing there, but my stomach twists the same way it did that night in room 112. I don't tell anyone at work about what happened. They'd think I'm crazy. But I know what I saw, and I know she's still out there, moving from place to place, drawn to the quiet hours when everyone else is asleep. Because that's when she first appeared. When the world goes still, and the only sound is the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint echo of someone who was never supposed to be here anymore. Story the end. It was almost midnight when I clocked in for another night shift at the assisted living facility where I'd been working for 2 years. The place was called Pine Ridge Care Center, a low-budget nursing home sitting off a quiet stretch of highway outside Knoxville, Tennessee. The building itself was a squat, single-story structure with faded beige siding and a roof that always seemed to leak whenever it rained. I'd gotten used to its smell, a mix of disinfectant, old linens, and something faintly metallic that never quite went away, no matter how much bleach we used. The night shift was always slow, mostly filled with light rounds, medication checks, and charting. There were usually 3 of us working, me, the charge nurse named Dana, and an orderly named Paul. But that particular week we were short-staffed because Paul had quit abruptly 2 days earlier, sending a one-line text to the manager that said, "Don't call me again. I'm done." That meant it was just Dana and me for all 36 residents. When I came in, Dana was sitting at the nurse's station with her elbows on the counter, scrolling through her phone. The overhead fluorescent lights made her look tired, and her uniform was wrinkled, like she hadn't slept in days. "Hey," she said without looking up, "you ready for another fun night in hell?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, setting my bag down. She sighed. "I had to put Mrs. Keaton back in bed again. She keeps saying there's a man standing by her window." "She's the one in room 14, right?" "Yeah, every night this week she's been talking about that. Says he's got shiny shoes and doesn't say a word. Just stands there." I smirked a little. "You think maybe it's just a shadow or something from the parking lot?" Dana shrugged. "Maybe. But she won't calm down until we close the blinds and turn on the lamp. I checked it out earlier. Nothing there." I didn't think much of it. Pine Ridge was full of patients who saw things that weren't there. Dementia, hallucinations, the works. You learned to just nod and soothe them until they settled down. The first few hours went by quietly. Around 1 a.m., I started doing my rounds, checking each room. The halls were silent except for the hum of the HVAC system and the squeak of my shoes on the tile. The residents all slept with their doors cracked open so we could peek in without turning on lights. The air felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. When I reached room 14, Mrs. Keaton was awake again, sitting upright in her bed. The bedside lamp cast a soft yellow glow over her wrinkled face. "Mrs. Keaton," I said quietly, "it's late. You should try to get some sleep." She turned her head toward me slowly. "He's here again," she whispered. "Who's here?" "The man." He's at the window. I looked over and the blinds were already closed tight. Sly, there's nobody there, I said. See? It's all shut. Her thin hands trembled as she pointed toward the corner. He was standing there just a minute ago. I saw the shine from his shoes. They're black and wet. I went to the window and pulled one of the slats open slightly, peering out into the darkness. The outside lot was empty except for my car and a couple of others. A dim floodlight flickered near the dumpster. Nothing unusual. Everything's fine, I told her softly. Try to rest, okay? I'll check on you again later. As I turned to leave, I could feel her eyes still on me, wide and fearful. Back at the nurse's station, I mentioned it to Dana. She said he's back, I told her. Of course she did, Dana muttered, rubbing her temples. She'll keep saying that till morning. She tried to laugh it off, but there was something uneasy in her tone. At around 2:30, Dana went to make coffee while I did another round. That's when things started to feel off. As I walked down the West Wing, I noticed the faint smell of damp earth, like mud or rain-soaked grass. It didn't make sense because the windows were sealed shut, and it hadn't rained in days. The closer I got to room 14, the stronger it got. When I pushed the door open, the air hit me like a wave, cold and wet, almost like someone had left the window open. But when I looked, it was still closed. Mrs. Keaton was lying flat this time, but her eyes wide open and unblinking. Mrs. Keaton? I said softly, stepping closer. Her gaze shifted toward the foot of the bed. He's standing there, she whispered. My heart started thudding. I turned quickly, but there was no one. Just the shadow of the IV stand stretching long across the wall. Please, she said, clutching her blanket. Tell him to leave me alone. It's okay, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. There's nobody here. I checked her vitals, they were fine, and tried to reassure her again before stepping back into the hallway. But as soon as I did, I heard something faint behind me, the soft sound of wet footsteps. I froze. They stopped almost immediately, like whoever or whatever it was didn't want to be caught. When I turned around, there was nothing. Just that smell of wet dirt again, stronger than before. I went back to the nurse's station, heart racing. Dana was there sipping her coffee, scrolling through the computer logs. You okay? She asked. Yeah, I lied. Just thought I heard something. She chuckled. This place will mess with your head if you let it. I didn't tell her about the smell or the footsteps. I didn't want her to think I was losing it. Around 3, I went to restock some supplies from the storage room. That room was in the far end of the building down a narrow hallway we barely used anymore. The lights flickered constantly, and the motion sensors took forever to kick in. I hated going down there. As I reached the door, I caught a glimpse of something reflected in the small window at the end of the corridor, a dark shape moving behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. When I finally went inside the supply room, I noticed wet footprints on the linoleum floor, bare, human footprints leading from the doorway toward the back wall. The prints stopped right in front of a shelf, and there was no puddle, no dripping trail back to the door. Just the prints, like someone had appeared there, then vanished. I stepped closer, my flashlight beam trembling. The floor felt slick beneath my shoes. When I bent down to touch one of the prints, the water was cold. Ice cold. I backed out quickly and went straight to find Dana. You have to see this, I said breathlessly. She frowned. What is it? Just come on. She followed me down the hall, but when we reached the storage room, the footprints were gone. The floor was completely dry. You sure you're not just tired? She said. I swear, Dana, they were right here. She sighed. Look, I believe you think you saw something, but we've been running on fumes for 2 nights straight. Let's just finish up and get through till morning. I nodded reluctantly, but I couldn't shake the dread settling in my gut. At 3:45, the power flickered. Just once, for a second, but it was enough to kill every light and machine before everything came back online. In that brief moment of darkness, I heard something that froze me, a voice, faint but close, whispering my name. It wasn't over the intercom. It was right next to me. When the lights returned, I was standing alone in the hallway. I ran back to the nurse's station again. Dana looked up, startled. What happened? The power. Did you hear that? Hear what? Someone said my name. She gave me a long look, then shook her head. We really need Paul back. By 4, the residents were restless. The call lights kept going off one after another. When I went to check, no one had pressed them. It happened at least 6 times in half an hour. The panel on the wall flickered each time, the red bulbs glowing faintly before shutting off again. Then I noticed something even stranger, Room 9's call light, which belonged to a resident named Mr. Brooks. That room had been empty for months. He'd passed away in July, and the bed hadn't been reassigned. Yet the light over his door kept blinking every few minutes. Dana said it was probably a wiring issue, but when I passed by the room, I thought I heard movement inside, a faint creak, like someone shifting in bed. I hesitated at the door, then slowly pushed it open. The air inside was colder than the hallway. The bed was perfectly made, untouched. But there was something on the floor, a small puddle, shaped like a footprint. Just one. I bent down, staring at it. The water was so clear it almost looked like glass. And again, that smell hit me. Damp earth. I backed out and shut the door, forcing myself not to run. Dana was starting her final rounds when I told her what I saw. She rubbed her forehead. "You know, this used to be a funeral home before it became a care center," she said absent-mindedly. "Maybe that's why weird stuff happens here." I stared at her. "You're kidding." "Nope. It's in the property records. My aunt used to work here before it changed hands in the 90s. She said sometimes the basement lights would turn on by themselves." That didn't help. We went about the rest of the night in uneasy silence. But as 5 rolled around, Dana said she was going to lie down in the staff room for a bit. "Wake me if anything happens," she murmured. That left me alone. I sat at the nurse's station trying to distract myself by updating charts, but then the intercom crackled. At first it was just static, but then a faint voice came through. "Help me," it whispered. I froze, staring at the speaker. The voice came again, more distinct this time. "He's in the hall." My stomach dropped. "Dana?" I called out, grabbing the handset. "Did you hear that?" No answer. I switched through the channels, trying to trace where it came from. Then, I noticed that the indicator light for room 14 was glowing red. Mrs. Keaton. I ran down the hall, my shoes squeaking loudly. When I reached her room, the door was open. The lamp was on. But she wasn't in bed. The sheets were pulled back, the pillow on the floor. "Mrs. Keaton?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response. I searched the room, the bathroom, even under the bed. Nothing. Then I noticed the window. The blinds were bent, and the latch was broken. The glass was smeared with something dark, almost like mud. I leaned closer and saw it clearly. Fingerprints pressed into the grime. They were too large to be hers. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I backed away, scanning the room for any sign of her. That's when I heard it again. Wet footsteps. Slow. Coming from the hall behind me. I turned just in time to see a figure step past the doorway, a tall man in a dark suit. His face was obscured by shadow, but the shine from his black shoes caught the light. They were dripping. He didn't look at me. He just stopped, then turned slowly toward the end of the corridor, walking away without a sound except for that steady squelch. Squelch. I couldn't move. My whole body locked up in terror. When I finally snapped out of it, I ran to get Dana, shouting her name. She stumbled out of the staff room, half asleep. "What's going on?" "Someone's in the building." I gasped. "A man, he went toward the west wing." She blinked in confusion but followed me. We searched every hallway, every room. Nothing. The back doors were still locked, the alarms armed. Then we found Mrs. Keaton. She was sitting in the middle of the west wing hallway, in her nightgown, staring straight ahead. Her bare feet were covered in mud. "Mrs. Keaton!" Dana rushed forward. "What are you doing out here?" She didn't respond. She just kept whispering something over and over. "He followed me. He followed me." Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. We brought her back to bed, cleaned her up, and called the on-call doctor. She finally fell asleep near dawn. By the time the day shift came in, I felt like I'd been awake for days. I didn't tell them everything, just that she'd wandered out of her room. Dana and I signed off our notes, exhausted. But when I went to grab my bag from the staff room, something caught my eye. Near the door, on the tile, was a single wet footprint. I stared at it for a long time before finally leaving. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying what I saw. I told myself it had to be exhaustion, stress, or the building's weird history. But the next morning, Dana called me, her voice shaking. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Mrs. Keaton passed away early this morning, around 6:15. Heart failure, they think. But here's the weird part. When the nurse went to clean her up, she found mud on the soles of her feet. I didn't go back to work for 3 days. When I finally did, room 14 was empty again, just like room 9. They'd stripped it, repainted it, even replaced the blinds. But every time I passed by, I could swear I smelled damp earth. And sometimes, late in the night, when everything's quiet, I still hear it. That slow, steady sound of wet shoes walking somewhere down the hall. Story the end.